and take roll.
Foley,
Here.
Perales, Esparza,
Here.
Cohen,
Here.
Davis.
Here.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, for our work plan review, we have one item that will be deferred to November. It is the City Roadmap, San Jose, Santa Clara Regional Wastewater Facility Capital Improvement Program Semi-Annual Report. I think we need a motion for that, is that correct?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Can we get a roll call on that, please?
Foley,
Aye.
Esparza,
Yes.
Cohen,
Aye.
Davis.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is the consent calendar. There are two items on it. I see there are two hands up. I'm hoping these are for the consent calendar because I did not think about that. 3 hands up. Okay, so let's go to public comment. If I missed you for the review of work plan, please feel free to roll that into your comment.
If I can just interrupt, one of the hands up is Councilmember Perales, who I think needs to be brought in as a panelist. Tony, can you take care of that? Thank you.
Councilmember Perales, welcome.
Thank you very much. My apologies. Thank you.
So we'll go to the public. Tessa.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for noticing that you did not put up the hand. Can you hear me? Okay, yeah, that you didn't take comment on the last item. So thank you for being more careful about that next time. Okay, good. And so basically the work plan as well as the downtown San Jose, I mean, our work plans have got to change in terms of responding to our emergency that we as a city have declared. And it's our climate emergency. And we need to change. Everything has to change. That's what it demands, is transformational change. And so we need to be looking at how our infrastructure is going to support the changes that we need. And the changes that we need to be hyper local. That we need to be hyper. I guess my timer is not working. Hyper local. And so there it goes. Anyway, and so it's really working on putting all of our resources to make our streets walkable and bikeable needs to be the focus. And all these plans, even the big plan for BART, needs to be brought way, way down. I mean, we have to be at 0 fossil fuels by really 2025. I mean, everything has changed. The whole, the whole dialogue is no longer 2050. I mean, that is so far out. I mean, we're experiencing climate crisis now. I mean, California is on fire in Southern California now, and it's not stopping our fires. So, that's what they projected. And so, and climate change means that nothing we see now is the way it's going to be. So there will be flooding, there'll be fires and droughts that we're having. And so we need to be preparing for that. And it really means to make our community walkable and bikeable, and to realign all of our plans, our plans that have much hubris involved in it and much fossil fuel involved in it, like our plan to build, to have our BART go to Santa Clara is redundant. All the environmentalists have said that, and all even if we want to support Caltrain, the redundancy in that, and then to build so it's that work plan of the BART, even though that's outside your purview as a city. But so many of the San Jose council members are on our VTA board and our Caltrain board. So that needs to be reworked. But even I was looking at, when we do these, Viva Calle and closing the roads like we did yesterday for a run, we need to leave the roads like that. All the resources that we have spent to make that happen, we need to make those permanent changes. And on top of it, we see what happened in Santa Clara, which I've been telling you, we need Santa Clara to be a bike lane. And yet you let the restaurants put little bulb outs for them. So we know that your priority is our restaurants and our businesses.
Thank you. Next speaker, Blair Beekman.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. Thank you for the meeting today. to speak to the consent calendar item about the Clean Community Energy Commission yearly report. Like most SJ commissions, the CCEC has been trying much to develop organized good studies and that can make for good examples in how the future of the SJ commission process can work. To note, Councilperson Mahan was recently on the CCEC commission. With that said, I ask once again that all parts of the community, including the progressive and East Side communities, should be considering the meaning of civic duty and what can always be an interesting evening in attending CCEC and other SJ Commission public meetings. I feel the CCEC Commission has important goals of green sustainability and open democracy that are simply meant to be inclusive, and like SJ commissions overall, can help develop a learning process of more open community democratic practices, as we need ways to better address and bridge the current chasms of miscommunication between East and West San Jose. I think as we all will be looking for help from the Equity Roundtable public process this January, that among its community issues, it can better define the future direction of San Jose commissions and a more open, accessible democratic future for San Jose. Another reminder that to put serious effort into our better practices of renewable energy and local procurement now, this can help ourselves transition easier and return to these more regular good practices and routines after any future large natural disaster events or emergencies. And to be clear, it is renewable, sustainable energy that is our hopeful and more practical future, not nuclear. Thank you. I'm actually done. With my remaining time, to offer, Pam Foley at CED last week offered to meld the work plan and consent calendar into one public comment time. I don't know, it's a bit efficient and useful. I don't know if it's totally good, but it's.
Thank you. Next speaker is caller ending in 5140.
Yeah, it looks like another natural disaster. The city council trying to fix the climate. Please, you guys are going to fix the climate. You're going to give us infrastructure. You're going to give us nothing. You know, look at the road diet you did on 11th Street. What a disaster that is with 2 lanes. If there's ever a major earthquake or anything, people trying to get in or out of San Jose, it's going to be terrible. Just take a look at the fiasco on Hillsdale with the road diet, where it's going to go down to 2 lanes on each side. Yeah, think of an earthquake or something else is going to be a problem, trying to get away. That's what happened to people in Paradise. They had a lot of infrastructure with that road diet they had in Paradise. Look what happened. People burned alive in their cars. They're not going to save the planet. You guys are more worried about grape flavored tobacco or who has a hookah bar or what time somebody buys a beer at the Rotten Robbie. That's what you guys are good at focusing on. You guys probably focus on the dress code around City Hall too, probably. Anything you guys can control or fine or whatever. You know, you guys like to control the fences and the sheds and the flagpoles. That's what you guys are good at. You're going to try to save the planet? I don't think so. Take a look at downtown. Infrastructure's terrible. Light rail, terrible. County transit bus, terrible. BART, terrible. Caltrain, terrible. You tell me what is good in the infrastructure of San Jose. Parking, terrible. Stores, well, are there any down there? All I see is for rent, for lease, for sale. Forget it. Who's going to go down there if you're going to get rid of the parking like you people want to do? You guys have lost your marbles. You know what you need? This is a term paper in a sophomore year of college on how to screw up a city. That's what you're doing to San Jose. You're making it worse than it already is. Wait.
Thank you. Do any of my colleagues have comments on the consent calendar or want to pull an item? I have
Move
one.
approval.
Second.
Thank you. I have one question before we vote. For the downtown parking board, John, or a member of your team, I'm assuming that the revenue for this fiscal year is also down for parking. I know when I've been downtown, and I go downtown fewer days than I have in the past, each week I see a lot of additional parking in the various garages and on the streets. is there a discussion? I didn't see it specifically on the work plan. Is there going to be a discussion about projected shortfalls and how that's going to impact the programs that get funded by the parking program?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Davis. John Risto, Director of Transportation. So yes, you are correct that the suspension of paid parking, both in meters and in the parking garages over the pandemic, really put a hard hit on the parking budget. We essentially have had to use all of our planned reserves just to keep the operations going and pay for the absolutely must needed repairs of the system. So it is being talked about, and we did review it at the last parking board meeting as well. And it is something that's going to come always back to council, that as we're starting to restore those services, hope we have forecasted out, but that's 5 years. We still stay negative in one of the out years, but restoring the services of the parking meters outside of downtown and having the economy coming back so that the downtown is starting to recover. Given all that, we're still a negative next year in terms of where we are with the budget. So the parking board has seen this. They're going to probably want to see it again. We were talking about that with them. We've got a special meeting coming up, and I think next week maybe for additional review by the parking board. So quick answer is yes, it's in pretty bad shape. Hopefully it'll start to get better now that we're restoring services, but yeah, it will take some time to get back out of it. And then we'll have to decide what we can and can't fund as those revenues recover.
Right. And even returning to charging, there are not as many people driving downtown.
That's correct. We've forecasted, yeah, and again, we've forecasted it's still going to be in a negative situation, at least for the next year.
Okay. Okay. And how will this come back to council?
Oh, well, it shows up in every year when we do appropriations of the annual budget. So you see that through all the different programs, and it is the parking has one of its own line items that describes where we are with the parking program revenues and use of funds as well. So
Are
you'll see
we
it
going?
then.
Okay. Are we going to be using, or are you talking about using recovery funds for this?
I
to
don't
kind of
believe that.
backfill?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm trying to think. I don't believe that we've got any recovery funds that are assigned in there. I will go back and check though, but I don't recall that being the case. So.
Okay. Thank you. If none of my colleagues have any other questions on the consent calendar, we can go ahead and have a vote.
Foley,
Aye.
Perales,
Yes.
Esparza,
Yes.
Cohen,
Aye.
Davis.
Yes. Thank you. And we will go on now to reports to committee. Item D1 is labor policies and community benefits best practices for long-term renewable energy contracts report. Lori.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think we're just going to pull up our slides here. Here we go. Great. Thank you. So I'm Lori Mitchell, and I'm the Director of Community Energy. And today I'm really pleased to be joined by Jean Soleil. She is our Deputy Director of Power Supply. Next slide. So today we're going to provide an overview of our long-term renewable energy contract. So we're going to provide a summary of the contracts, the labor provisions, and then importantly, the workforce development funds that we've obtained from the developers that are constructing these contracts. And then we're going to review the labor policies of other CCAs and procurement entities in the CCA workspace. So next slide. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jean Soleil. She's our Deputy Director of Power Supply, and she's going to provide an overview of our existing long-term renewable agreements.
Good afternoon, council members. So I wanted to start out by giving you some information about the long-term renewable agreements that we have already entered into. We've entered into 4 long-term renewable agreements. 2 of them will begin operations at the end of this year, basically the beginning of next year. And those include a wind agreement that is 225 megawatts, and it'll be a 15-year agreement for wind in New Mexico. The second agreement that's going to begin operation at the beginning of 2022 is an innovative solar agreement that requires delivery from 7 in the morning to 10 at night. So it includes hours in which solar typically doesn't deliver. The way that the developer is going to do that is by having batteries. But the bottom line is their commitment to us is to deliver clean energy from 7 in the morning to 10 at night. That agreement is a 12-year agreement, and that is located in Kern County. Then we have 2 additional solar agreements that will begin service at the beginning of 2023. There is a solar agreement also in Kern County by the same developer. That's just a standard solar agreement. That is a 15-year agreement for 100 megawatts of solar. And then we have a final agreement located in Fresno, California, also a solar agreement, but this one has 10 megawatts of storage. It's got a term of 20 years, and the owner there is EDPR, which is a Portuguese utility. Next slide, please. So our existing agreements do address labor. All of them require contractors to meet applicable laws, including prevailing wage requirements. And we've been informed that all of our suppliers are using union labor, at least for a portion of the project. In addition, all of the suppliers that we've entered into agreements with have contributed some community benefits or workforce development funding, and the total amount contributed by the 4 agreements is approaching $1 million, $875,000. Next slide, please. So the 2 agreements with Terragen, which is the innovative 62 megawatt solar agreement and the traditional 100 megawatt solar agreement. For that one, Terragen has informed us that it intends to use union labor via project labor agreements. And some of the labors that will be covered by that are the Southern California District Council of Laborers, Laborers Local 2020, Laborers 220, Southwest Region Council of Carpenters, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 428, and the Iron Workers, Local 416. Next slide, please. The EDPR Sunrisa project, the one that's 100 megawatts of solar with 10 megawatts of battery, that one, there is a requirement that they use union labor. The power purchase agreement requires use of union labor for the engineering, procurement, and construction contract. That's basically the contractor that will procure the equipment and be responsible for the bulk of construction. We do not yet know who that contractor is going to be, and there is not yet a project labor agreement because that is not slated to come online until the end of 2022, but it will be with labor agreement because that's a contract requirement. Next slide, please. The final agreement is the 225 megawatt New Mexico wind agreement. That one is located in New Mexico and it will pay local prevailing wages. It supported 650 jobs at the peak of construction, although the wind farm itself is not being built or was not built because it's already been built using union labor. The transmission line, which is needed to bring that solar power to California, was built using union labor, organized through local Albuquerque and New Mexico IBW 611. And that work supports 156 jobs. Next slide, please. So in terms of community investments, Each one of the projects has committed community investments. The total to date is $870,000. The first round of funding was directed to SJ Works, and that was $275,000. It covers 150 participants. And I believe that project works with disadvantaged youth to get them started on, get them in a job that will get them started on a career path. We're working with the Office of Economic Development to identify additional uses for the remaining committed funds. One thing about those funds is that the funds need to be connected to clean energy issues, but other than that, that money is fairly flexible. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Lori now.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. So next I'll discuss other CCA labor policies and best practices. So it's important to note that all CCAs are governmental entities. So they are organized either as a JPA, a Joint Powers Authority, or a single jurisdiction, which is how our program is organized. And so their labor policies are governed by local, state, and federal labor agencies and laws, including the California Labor Department. Also important to note that CalCCA is actually a trade organization, and they don't have enforcement authority over CCA labor practices and policies. Their primary focus is to advocate at the CPUC and in the legislature for favorable regulatory and legislative policies that benefit CCAs. And then we did survey a number of CCAs that have board adopted labor policies. Some of those included Peninsula Clean Energy, MCE, which serves 4 counties, including Marin, Napa, and Contra Costa County. And then San Diego Community Power, which is newly formed. So next slide. So just some highlights from those policies. So Peninsula Clean Energy requires bidders to provide information on their labor practices and then scores bids on whether or not they comply. MCE encourages the use of union members from multiple trades, and then they have an agreement with IBEW Local 302 to use union labor for the solar projects built in their service territory of Contra Costa County. And then San Diego Community Power has adopted a policy of neutrality between using union and non-union labor. So next slide. And then California Community Power, this is a new JPA that was formed in 2020. We are a part of this. You may recall this item came to council last year. We joined California Community Power as a joint procurement agency. So this is a new JPA that enters into power supply agreements on behalf of several different CCAs. And what they're looking at doing so far is a long duration storage project. That project has not been contracted yet, and so there's been a lot of development work focused on that project. So the board for CC Power did adopt a labor policy that was applicable to those 2 solicitations, and that included a preference for a project labor agreement and allowed up to 5 points out of 100 in a scoring rubric for those projects. And then they required for projects that don't implement a PLA, they required an audit to ensure compliance with prevailing wage and to evaluate the use of apprenticeship programs. And then finally, the policy encouraged the use of local labor. And it's important to note that CC Power is still working on a broader labor and environmental policy, which they likely will consider later this year or into 2022 as that organization gets up and running and has more resources to focus on these issues. So next slide. So then we evaluated best practices across many different CCAs and identified a few that were common. Number one, it was very common to ask for developers to provide information on their labor practices and efforts to support disadvantaged communities. It was also a best practice to include supplier contributions to community benefits and local workforce development in the renewable agreements. And then most CCAs had adopted flexibility that allows them to balance both labor considerations alongside other factors such as the project value and price, counterparty creditworthiness, and the impact on the environment and local communities. So next slide. So in summary, we have followed all of those best practices. We continue to collaborate with other CCAs to improve those practices. All of our PPAs do require that contractors meet applicable laws, including prevailing wage, and many of them have used union labor. We've also successfully negotiated favorable labor characteristics in all of our agreements. And we've negotiated for almost $1 million in community benefits and workforce development funding. Right now, that amount sits at $870,000. So next slide. I think that really is the end. And so we are available for questions.
Thank you. We'll go first to the public. Professor Woodmansee.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for our public comment. Tessa Woodmansee, and basically the comment in regards to, working on, making sure that, there's union jobs, and that's all very nice and good. But our focus as we move forward out of COVID and into our future, it has to be all about the individual and public health, and making, the whole thing about jobs is a distraction from the basic needs of human beings: food, clothing, and shelter. And one of the issues that, in terms of the individual, is our solar charge. And I wanted to speak to the person who's head of the CCA that we employ right now, in regards to what the PG&E's request that the individual solar user will pay $80 a month. I'm not sure about the details of the whole thing, but I really wanted to speak to that woman who works for us in regards to our, CCA or CCE, and basically, that we need to really push that we don't pay that $80. That would be a disincentive to solar users to be on the. I understand that if we're using the backup of our PG&E as our backup, I'm sure we do have to pay something to have that system in place. But I think $80 is too much for us to have to pay a month. So I'm hoping that our city really advocates that the PUC to not approve, or the CPUC to not approve PG&E's request for $80 a month from solar users. And in addition, we really need to be working on getting away from PG&E completely, away from the transmission lines, and really get our solar backup, to have a solar backup, solar banks that are, community solar that we can use as our backup. And that's what we need. What do you call it? Community batteries. We need a community battery, and we really need to be focusing on that.
Thank you. Next speaker is Blair Beekman.
Hi, Blair here. Before you start my clock, can I ask a procedural question? There's an incredibly bad sound, like everyone's talking through a wind tunnel. Can I ask the city clerk to mute everyone's microphones, please? And then you can start my clock over. Yeah, it hasn't started yet, but thanks. Just be aware of it, and hopefully you can troubleshoot the issue. Thank you for this item. I'll start now. Thank you very much. I hope we can begin some serious effort into our better practices of renewable energy and its local procurement now. This can help ourselves transition easier and return to our more regular good practices and routines after any large natural disaster event emergencies, possibly. Again, a thank you for all the work of the SJCE and community efforts to address PG and issues like AB 1139 at the state level. From this, we have to learn to be aware of our own local issues and practices better, as San Jose has already developed good beginnings to develop much more reliance on renewable energy and its local procurement. As I've said before, to work on renewable energy and local procurement now can make a transition easier to return to our more regular practices after natural disaster events, much like open public policies can do the same thing. Good practices just, it continues our better selves through difficult times. Again, renewable energy is obviously way better than nuclear. Thank you for your work with unions at this time. A few other thoughts that thank you to look into the work of the East Bay Community Energy. They have 4 public meetings at least a month. And they offer a really good example for the public how they can understand the community energy process. It's really good meetings. And I know San Jose Community Energy, they have old funding contracts that are really difficult for them to work out of. I thank you for the efforts that how you are trying to work your best towards good subsidy plans for all parts of the community, and just an openness how to address these issues. It's a really important way to work that I think we're trying to address how to work in those terms. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is caller 5140.
You guys are living in a dreamland. You're going to be an all-electrical grid someday with no natural gas. PG&E lines have not been repaired or upgraded for decades, if not half of a century. And all of a sudden, San Jose thinks they're going to save the world with some kind of renewable energy. You guys are out of your mind. It's not going to work. Renewable energies are for offsetting what you already have, which is great. But then you want to get rid of natural gas, which your fantasy came true because what, the state and the county authorized no more natural gas. The natural gas prices are up, which you guys are probably loving because then all of a sudden people think electricity is going to save the day. How do you think all these electric cars are going to be charged? Take a look at Germany right now. They're already predicting blackouts because they thought that they were going to run their industrial economy on renewable energy, and it's been a complete failure. Everyone talks about what happens in Europe. Let's do what France does and go nuclear, baby. That's what we need. When you go to France, their electricity works. You know what else? It's totally affordable, but not here, not in postmodern California. You guys want to do the most asinine things when it comes to energy. It's unbelievable. How about build a dam? Oh no, can't do that. How about not hydroelectric, but other forms of energy like geothermal? Nope, don't do that. You guys think you're going to run some chintzy electrical grid through your city. You know what? I want to see you guys try to do this. I can't wait to watch the power go out like we're in Cuba or Venezuela or something. You guys are laughable. You're the laughing stock of this entire nation, the city of California in general. Take a look around. Take a look around how.
Thank you. Next speaker is Roland.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. So as a taxpayer and a ratepayer, this is my first comment. I sincerely hope that whatever policies you come up with essentially do not prohibit companies like Tesla for bidding for renewable energy contracts. Another thing I want to bring to your attention is a lot of people are talking about battery backup, but there are different ways to actually, when we have surplus capacity in the system during the day, either through wind or to solar, whereby we can store that capacity without resorting to batteries. If you look at hydro, if you have got a dam, you know how that works. You drain the water that generates electricity, off you go. But what a lot of people don't know is that you can actually use hydro to use whatever that reservoir is as a storage for energy. And the way that works is that during the day, when the grid has got surplus capacity, instead of charging batteries, you're actually pumping water back into the reservoir. And then at night, that water drains, and that's how you generate the power at night. And I hope that's one of the solutions that will be considered by this committee moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Turning it back to my colleagues. Okay. Councilmember Perales, sorry about that.
Thank you, Chair. So just a question in regards to, I think the potential difference from what you listed in the memo on some of the labor policies from other CCAs. You listed that Peninsula Clean Energy, PCE, you described some of their language and their policy. I won't read it, but in the memo on page 5. And then MCE, you stated their encouragement for direct use of union members, multiple trades, and then obviously those two examples. And then for California Community Power, the JPA that we're a part of, you gave an example there. What I'm curious, or what the description of what our language that the board there has voted on. How are those different? I'm curious. They sound fairly similar to me, but I'm curious how they may be different, and if there's any encouragement, if there are some great differences that we can provide, encouragement we can provide to our JPA to try and strengthen our policy.
Yeah, it's a great question, Council Member. I think there are a lot of similarities, particularly among MCE and Peninsula's policy, encouraging the use of union labor. And most CCAs do encourage that in their RFP and solicitation process, and then, allow some scoring methodology to evaluate that. Where there might be some differences is one is San Diego. They recently formed, and they adopted a policy of neutrality, regarding the use of union labor. So that's a little bit of a different approach. And then CC Power, they're a very new organization just getting started. So they did adopt, the policy that we described that applies to the RFP that they're looking at now for long duration storage. So I think there's a lot of similarity in the approach there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I saw the similarities too, I guess. On the nuanced difference is what I was wondering if you had any better understanding of, maybe some nuanced differences, and specifically where we might be able to strengthen our policy to encourage the use, similar to MCE, right? The use of union members, or if, or like, the language that you described for PCE that seems as well like it's encouraging of use. I think there was a score there as well, similar to ours, where there's a benefit. You didn't put a number though for PCE, so I'm curious if maybe there's a higher percentage or points given to, or that they provide there for union bidders.
Yeah, I'm not sure, John. Do you know that detail? It's certainly something we can look up and get back to you if not.
Yeah, we can look more closely. It's my understanding with both of the policies, and particularly PCE's policy, is that it's new and they're still working out what it means in practice. And there's even, people are really working out exactly what it means. They're clear that people need to provide information. But the question of exactly how that information is then treated in the scoring process is something that there's still a fair amount of discussion about.
Okay. What is I know we're just accepting the report here. So what is the follow-up of this item? Will we not be hearing another update on this for a year, or is this something that we'd have to request as a one-off?
Yeah, we didn't intend to have further follow-up. We do intend to continue to provide information on our procurement in the quarterly reports, the information memos that we issue each quarter on, both our long-term renewable contracts as well as our other power supplies. So we'll continue to follow up and provide information in that venue, but we hadn't anticipated further follow-up. Although another, what we do expect is, as we continue to operate, we are going to enter into additional long-term contracts that will come before council, and so more opportunity to engage with the council as we issue additional RFPs and provide recommendations on expanding our portfolio.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think I recognize, right, the JPA that we're in, that's really where we'd want to maybe encourage, if there's possible for, I think, strengthening the language. And I'd like to see, right, what opportunities there are there. So if you could, in one of those quarterly reports, the next one, be able to just provide a little more info if you can find it, as far as I know you stated, up to 5 points out of the 100 within the category there of labor practices. And I'd be curious how many points maybe are given through PCE's bids, again, just to try to see how we could have or lobby for some stronger language on our JPA. So I'll take that, though, as if you don't mind providing that as an update in one of the next quarterly reports, and then that conversation can continue. But I appreciate the report back today, and I'll move approval.
Great. Yes, we're
I'll second.
great. Happy to provide that in the quarterly reports. Thank you.
Councilmember Cohen?
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to follow up on that line of questioning. So our scoring, let me see if I understand all this correctly. Because you talk about the scoring system used by PCE and MCE, and then our scoring. Our scoring does not have any points in there for labor practices. Is that correct?
That's correct. Jean, do you want to describe our scoring process in more detail?
Right. At the moment, we do not include points for scoring. Points for labor. We do include 5 points for small business and local entities, which I think is consistent with city law. Typically, CCAs, I mean, most CCAs, even if they don't have a formal policy, do talk to their bidders and encourage their bidders to use union labor. And that's pretty much the standard practice for solar in California. But we at the moment have not included points for labor performance.
So that's kind of what I was a little bit confused about the message, because it wasn't part of the scoring system for these contracts that you described. But then at one point in the presentation, you mentioned that we had signed these contracts and encouraged the use of unionized labor. So that was part of a conversation, but wasn't necessarily a requirement. Is that right? So we signed these contracts, we got that labor as part of it, but it wasn't some kind of official scoring that was done as part of that contract negotiation.
Right. So the requirement was for prevailing wage. And as Jean said, the city requirements around local. And so we followed the city's standard procurement requirements. And then as these projects, have moved into development and construction, we've stayed in contact with them. And, that's how we've understood, what union labor they're utilizing. And as Jean said, for the most part, solar projects constructed in California do use union labor. Usually that's an issue at the local level as the projects are developed. So it's something that, we've monitored and, happy to report out on, but it hasn't been a requirement when we put our RFP out. John, do you want to add to that? Sure.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's correct, Lori. That we've met the city requirements. We have conversations. I think that, all developers know that CCA strongly prefer the use of union labor, but at the moment we don't have either a requirement or points except with respect to small and local businesses.
Okay, and the prevailing wage requirement requires prevailing wage at the locality where the work is being done. That's correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
And then so as far as trying to get, if we wanted to try to push for some scoring preference in our scoring system, as Councilmember Perales mentioned, we would just have to ask the board of the CCE to consider that as part of the RFP process going forward.
So it's important to note that there's two different procurement mechanisms that we procure under. One is just our own solicitations that we run as San Jose Clean Energy. And then you're right, we're also a part of CC Power, which is a new JPA that jointly procures new products on behalf of a number of CCAs. And so the project they're evaluating right now is a long duration storage project. And so that's what we reported on, that the board adopted the labor policy described there. They're continuing to have conversation to adopt a broader policy. And then that long duration storage project, we anticipate having a recommendation for council early next year.
That one, they, as the CCP board, has put in place a scoring system that includes points for labor practices in their scoring.
It does, right.
So for our local RFP process, which doesn't have that in the scoring, we as a council at some point would potentially have the opportunity to add that to our scoring system if we wanted to.
Yeah, we'd have to, have that direction and then work with our city attorney's office and our procurement offices to implement that type of a policy. So far, we have followed just the standard city procurement policies.
I understand. Okay. Okay, thank you. I think that answers all my questions. I appreciate the report. Thank you for bringing back that detailed information based on
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Any other colleagues have questions or comments? All right, let's vote.
Foley,
Aye.
Perales,
Yes.
Esparza,
Yes.
Cohen,
Aye.
Davis.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item D2, Draft Community Forestry Management Plan Report. John, would you like to introduce the team?
Yes, thank you, Chair Davis. John Russo, Director of Transportation. This afternoon, we're really pleased to present the draft Community Forest Management Plan. With me today that will do the bulk of the presentation is Russell Hanson. He's our city arborist, and Ryan Allen, the principal author of the report, who works for Dudek Consultants. And, I just want to do a little bit of background and some context setting that what the CFMP is, the Community Forest Management Plan. It really was intended to be a technical, independent analysis, really taking a hard look at how the city is currently managing various tree programs, understand the current state of the community forest, and then develop some opportunities for improvement. This really is just the first step in a critical analysis of this issue, a very important issue to us. And what we're trying to do is actually set up for success, really, the city with this plan. Maybe one thing I could do to just explain maybe some analogy to this plan to previous work that the city has done. I'll give you an example, a little bit of history where a number of years ago, the pavement in the city was actually in pretty poor condition and declining in its condition. So the city set about to do a very comprehensive review of how to reverse that negative trend of the pavement condition. So we identified and did a comprehensive review of all of the resources needed and business practice changes that would have been needed to actually improve on pavement condition throughout the city. At that point, we identified what resources and practices we needed to change to actually make those improvements. We then presented all those needs and improvements to City Council and Mayor to actually get direction. And then once that direction and identified the problem was out there, Then we, the city, along with many of our stakeholder partners and agencies, set about to actually develop resources and new practices to address this issue. And I think you can see the fruits of that now with throughout the city. We're currently doing about 200 miles per year of repaving of all the city streets using our new practices, new funding that we were able to secure with all those stakeholder partners. We will bring that back, that pavement plan, every year to council to update it and provide new ways of doing it better. And I think that's a really good analogy and comparative example for what the CFMP is trying to do, which is, again, we've got an issue with our community forest. We wanted to take a very hard look, independent look at how we can be better. That's both in the city and outside the city. Wanted to develop goals and objectives and establish a work plan that would be able to get us into the right place. And then bring that whole plan forward to council for direction, and then do so annually, come back every year and update the plan, resources needed, what our priorities are. So the same thing that we did successfully with the pavement program, we want to do with the community forest management plan. Next slide, please. So this slide is really kind of goes without saying, but it's the why we want to do this. And this is where provides all the reasons that we really need to update and improve on our community forest and canopy. I think it's pretty self-evident within the slide, but I think the important things that we want to get out of this is really cleaning our air, having some way to mitigate some of the climate change issues that we're being presented with, capturing clean water in our new green infrastructure plan, and really improve physical and mental health and lower the temperature of neighborhoods and actually really make great places. And improving the canopy of the tree canopy of the city is really going to go a long ways toward that. You know, there have been a number of studies done that try to quantify those benefits, and all through California, if you add it all up, all the economic benefit and value of that, it's over $3 billion annually in terms of the benefit the trees provide to an urban area like this. Unfortunately, with where we are right now with the city, our historical budgets have not been able to keep up with tree maintenance and or the planting needed to get back to that. Another slide that I want to get to, and thank you for the large trees versus small ones. I think it's really important, and I don't think this is any big news to anyone either, that what we're trying to do is get to those large canopy trees, and that takes a lot longer for us to do that. And to do so, we need to actually start now doing that. The comparison of trying to get to the large trees versus smaller ones is just really much better for carbon sequestration and storage. It goes without saying, the greater environmental benefit, stormwater avoidance, and definitely more shade. What I'm going to do now is hand over the presentation to Russ Hansen and then on to Ryan. They're going to do the bulk of the presentation and actually expand on many of these things that we've been working on with the plan. Russ?
Thank you, John, and council members for inviting us today to kind of talk about all this. So as kind of John had mentioned, when it comes to benefits, bigger trees mean bigger benefits, and that's not just a 1-for-1 ratio. That is an exponential type situation. So, you know, we wanted to take a really critical look at our forest. As you can see in the graphic that we've got up here today to share with you, the majority of our trees, almost 70% of our trees, are in that small to moderate category. They just typically do not reach that, I'll say, large to very large canopy size, that we're at about 31% overall. What that really means is that we get less when it comes to the benefits from these trees. We get less shade, less stormwater management, less pollution mitigation, and just overall less value when we're not able to mature or to maintain our trees to maturity and get them to that large sized canopy. So it really also means this slide here really represents to us that when it comes to planting our trees in the future, we really got to be careful and make sure that we're trying to maximize the trees that we're putting in. That not everybody can have a crepe myrtle, But ultimately, not everybody can grow a large mature oak tree either. But we got to find a balance. We got to get as large as we can for the location that we're actually trying to plant these trees. So there'll be a lot of consideration on that. When it comes to the management plan itself, again, I think what we really want to get across is this supports other city policies and goals, whether it's Envision 2040, whether it's climate smart, green stormwater, even DOT's own kind of Vision Zero program. The tree program has an influence on every single one of these. It needs to align with those. It needs to kind of raise the awareness of all of that. The plan itself has been funded through a CAL FIRE climate investment grant, and really consisted of about 3 different parts. The first part is going to be a strengths, weaknesses, opportunity analysis. The second one will be our strategic work plan. And then the third one was an update to our tree policy and best practices manual. So beyond that, again, as we get into some of the details, it's been about a 3 to 4 year effort for us. Key deliverables, again, involved that SWOT analysis of the entire San Jose tree program. It involved the planting of 200 trees within disadvantaged communities because this is climate investment funded. There was a planting requirement. Beyond that, we developed a new tree management database within DOT to manage our street tree inventory. We're looking to complete our full inventory for city maintained trees while we had completed our street tree inventory in 2014. We're still lacking when it comes to city facilities and so forth. So with parks, community centers, libraries, et cetera, we've got to complete that portion of it. And that will be done hopefully over the next 6 to 8 months as we kind of keep moving forward on this. And then again, updating our tree policy and best practices manual is one of the other key deliverables in all of this. So beyond that, I guess at this point, I'll turn it over to Ryan. He'll get into some of the more technical aspects. Ryan Allen is our consultant from Dudek Environmental. And I'll go ahead and I'll turn it over to him so he can get into some of the more specifics for you all.
Thank you, Russell, and thank you to all the committee members for giving us the opportunity to talk about the CFMP, the Community Forest Management Plan. Dudek, like Russell said, is an environmental consulting firm, and we've been working in California for 40 years now. We have over 500 full-time employees all throughout California, Oregon, Hawaii, and do projects all throughout the United States. I get to lead our urban forest management planning team. I'm an ICE International Society of Arboriculture certified arborist, tree risk assessment qualified, and a municipal specialist. Over the last, just within the last 3 years, Dudek has led similar urban forest or community forest management planning projects with cities all the way from La Mesa down by in San Diego up to Chico in Northern California. We've led a very similar project with the city of Los Angeles. We've worked with Beverly Hills Downey. So all throughout California and lots of experience leading these efforts. So what we have here are 6 of our key findings. The most pressing issues that we identified in reviewing the community forest management actions and the tree conditions and urban forest condition. The first point, tree canopy cover is declining and has declined from 15.3% to 13.5% over a 6-year period. That data was analyzed from the U.S. Forest Service. They completed a canopy cover study of every city in California. So we're able to compare those data sets. And important thing to point out here is that trees take a long time to grow. Recapturing canopy once it's lost takes years. With the effects of climate change, with increased heat, with the drought, with growing and expanding urban footprints, the need for shade for the benefits of trees is more and more pressing. And while trees are not going to save the world from climate change, it's going to make our cities livable, healthy places that people can get to their parks and their walk down their streets and go to the stores and live a healthy life. So it's a very pressing issue for the city right now. And with that, the next bullet point, those who are most vulnerable to environmental and health impacts from climate change and pollution hazards are most economically disadvantaged communities, and they have fewer trees and lower canopy cover. So there's a pressing need to plant trees everywhere, but specifically with those communities that are most disadvantaged and most in need. Getting there is going to take resources. It's going to take financial and human resources. And currently, San Jose is low in both of those, lacking some of the staffing that's needed and the funding to reach some of the goals that are identified in the plan and actively manage the entire population, street tree and park tree population. Currently, the city spends approximately $4 million a year on its community forest program, and we estimate it would need an additional $20 to $24 million to manage all trees in the public realm. So that would include all street trees and all park trees. And that's one of the recommendations is getting to look at how to make that happen. Urban infill and development practice limits space for trees. We recognize there's housing crisis, there's needs to increase the urban footprint, and it can be done with trees in a responsible way. And there's a need to look at the practices that of how things are being built, how trees are preserved from the beginning of the process, and not waiting till the end to then look at a tree. But you can get creative. You can do things that incorporate trees into these projects when it's done in the beginning. When everything else, like the street lights, sidewalks, sewers, when all that's getting looked at, trees need to be looked at that time as well, so they can be preserved and planned for properly. There's opportunities for the city and our city forest to continue its current partnership and strengthen it and expand it. OCF has been a leading community forest nonprofit in San Jose for 25 years. They've been able to leverage their resources into helping bring more resources to the city to help fund community forest, tree planting, events, maintenance. There's the opportunity there to look at ways to bring in more funding through joint grant partnerships and other opportunities to build on the great work that's already being done. And then the last point, you need good data to continue to make good management decisions and understand the current condition of the city trees. The current inventory is not complete and some of it's outdated, and that needs to be updated with a full and complete update of the inventory, and then subsequently that inventory needs to be continually updated on an annual basis. Go ahead. This next slide shows the canopy cover by council districts across San Jose based on 2018 data. While canopy cover is low overall for the city, like we said, disadvantaged communities have the lowest canopy cover, especially on the east side of town. And the inequity of canopy cover is really apparent in this graphic. There can be some environmental factors with the west side of the city receiving some more fog and rain, and the east side receiving less. But this wouldn't be a significant difference to justify the disparity of canopy cover. District 6 has the highest canopy cover at 19%, and then this district, along with District 10, exceeded 20% in 2012, but since then both areas have lost canopy cover. 20% for a 20% canopy cover for a city like San Jose is considered a realistic baseline. It doesn't mean that you can't achieve higher canopy cover in areas throughout the city, and there are census tracts in neighborhoods that have 25 to 30% canopy cover, but there's a lot of areas that have 8, 9, 10% canopy cover. With homes and roads built, there's not necessarily the space to reach an optimal 40% extremely high canopy cover that you only really see in cities that had existing forested lands. So looking at a 20%, we use that 20% baseline to help develop some of our targets and goals with planting trees and increasing canopy cover. This table is a more detailed breakdown of the canopy loss by district. If you look at the bar graph to the right, the gray bar represents canopy cover in 2012. The blue bar shows canopy in 2018, and the brown bar at the bottom reflects the loss of canopy in each council district. Canopy is being lost to multiple factors, including development and densification, lack of maintenance and neglect of the trees, and a lack of enforcement and follow-up on preserving trees. Every council district has experienced loss of canopy cover, though obviously some lost more canopy during the timeline and others have had less just to begin with. So the SWOT analysis evaluated the current condition of San Jose's community forest and management practices, highlighting the challenges and obstacles. The 6 strategies shown on the slide represent the path forward for the city to move towards creating a sustainable community forest. Our first item there, streamline the governance structure. The city's tree governance structure is cumbersome and confusing for residents, and they often wonder like which department to go to seek assistance from. And this current structure is also inadequately resourced. Second point, ensure community forest sustainability. The city must invest in its tree program to begin to recover lost canopy and be able to get to that baseline of 20%. And developing a criteria for selecting tree species that will thrive as the climate changes and to support local habitat and wildlife. We need to plant trees that will be adapted to the future environmental conditions of San Jose, so those trees will be adapted and thrive. Support diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of our key findings, like we said, is that economically disadvantaged neighborhoods have fewer trees and lower canopy cover. Increasing canopy cover in these neighborhoods should be prioritized. One way that the community can get further involved in decisions in the community forest is establishing an advisory committee, having more partnerships with community-based organizations, and expanding on its current partnership with our city forest. It'll help ensure these communities are engaged and that residents understand the importance and value of a healthy community forest. Funding the community forest. Like I said, the city's tree programs are severely underfunded and it requires an infusion of resources to stop the canopy loss. Efficient and effective management. The city needs to allocate resources to, like I said, update its tree inventory on a regular basis, use this data to make key decisions. And then finally, standardize and improve planning and development. Trees must be a priority during development, and they need to be considered in the initial planning stages and not at the end to ensure mature trees are protected and adequate canopy cover is included in the development project. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Russell.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it. So again, what we're going to talk about here is kind of one of the strategies that Ryan had just discussed, and that's the streamlining of governance structure. As you can see in the graphic that's kind of presented here, you have multiple departments that are dealing with trees, and there's very little alignment or coordination, collaboration between them. So we're not quite sure what streamline means. That may ultimately mean we need to do something in terms of combining it into one department or one section. But it also means, if nothing else, we've got to do a much better job of collaboration amongst the departments, and we've got to make sure that each of the departments is sufficiently resourced, bottom line. So, you know, again, as it sits right now, when it comes to private property trees, you've got 3 different departments that are involved with it. You've got Public Works that's looking at them during development review. You've got code enforcement kind of working with property owners when there are hazard trees that aren't being addressed. And then you also have private trees that may be overly pruned or may be removed without a permit. They have a responsibility for the enforcement actions on those. Building department has some influence on it when it comes to new home remodel, or not new home, but home remodels and so forth that don't necessarily rise to the level of the planning department. Building looks at their footprints and so forth and makes decisions on trees based off of what the owners are submitting. And then planning, again, when it comes to the bigger projects, when it comes to private tree removal, et cetera, they all deal with those on a private side. Public trees, you know, Parks and Recreation has responsibility for all of our parks, community centers, libraries, and so forth, as well as once we complete this inventory over the next 6 or 8 months for their trees, they'll have a responsibility to kind of continue to maintain that inventory so that we have current and accurate data that we can use. As far as Public Works, similar to kind of in the other private trees, really comes into play when it comes to development services and working through that process. But they also play a part in that when it comes to Public Works projects that they're doing, that they have an influence on trees with the work that they're completing. So beyond that, transportation, you know, obviously street trees, we do permits, planting, pruning, and so forth. We manage our special districts areas of San Jose where owners have paid additional, for an additional or elevated level of service when it comes to their trees. DOT is responsible for that and making sure that that work is completed. We have just general maintenance in the public right-of-way when it comes to our own street trees and so forth. And then as well, emergency tree response. When trees come down within the roadway or otherwise and need to be cleared, DOT is responsible for that. We have our street tree inventory maintenance, and then we have our heritage tree list as well that's maintained by DOT. Even though some of those trees may be private, DOT is the department that's responsible for managing that list and making sure that it gets updated. Beyond that, transportation also works with our city forest. As Ryan had mentioned, they're a very key partner for us. They work with us on tree and establishment planting, they do outreach and education, and as well, they have a community nursery that's available for helping us kind of select species that may adapt to climate change. But the one key thing on this graphic I'll point out is down at the bottom there, again, that Community Forest Advisory Committee. We fully expect that should this plan move forward and be adopted by the city, we are interested in forming this committee of key stakeholders to where we can get together and really analyze some of these little things that we have come up with in terms of our recommendations and so forth. We've really got to get into the details on those. So they will help to kind of guide us and prioritize those as we report to them, and as well back to perhaps T&E committee in the future. So again, talked about our city forest. For us, a very key partner. They've been around since 1994. They've helped us to obtain over $15 million in urban forestry grants. They've leveraged another $25 million in volunteer time to the benefit of our forest. They conducted lots of outreach and education when it comes to elementary and middle school students, up to almost 40,000 students currently. And then again, planting over 80,000 trees and shrubs citywide since their inception. And then lastly, again, community nursery, real key component for us, helping us with species, helping us to educate the public on proper planting and everything else that they do. So lots of benefits that they provide. We hope to kind of expand upon those in the future. This next graphic that we're going to share with you is reflective of the tree pruning cycles that we currently are looking at for the city of San Jose on trees that we're responsible for. The industry standard for all of this is that we should really be on about a 5 to 7 year pruning cycle when it comes to this. Overall, the city of San Jose, the ones that we are responsible for, street trees, or those public trees that we're responsible for, total about 37,000 trees. In order to really preserve, enhance, and grow our community forests, we're going to have to do more in terms of maintenance activity for those. So for our 37,000 trees, we only currently have a budget of about $230,000 The majority of that comes with our special districts. But what that really kind of translates to for us is you can see on the left-hand side, San Francisco, they're at about a 3 to 5 year pruning cycle for all of their trees. They went through, I'm going to say about 5 years ago now, maybe a little bit less, and passed a ballot measure where they were able to kind of increase the frequency with their pruning. So they're up at a 3 to 5 year, far exceeding the industry standard. Sacramento's a little bit closer to the standard at 5 to 7. You get down further towards LA where it's a little bigger and they have much more to worry about and manage. They're on an 18-year cycle. And if you look way off on the right-hand side there, San Jose is at about a 123-year pruning cycle, which effectively means there are several cases where trees will not be pruned in their lifetime when we talk about our street trees, that because ownership changes and property owners aren't necessarily aware of their responsibility, it just sometimes isn't occurring. We ultimately, we need to do better with that. So above and beyond maintenance and just pruning what we already have, you know, tree planting, if we're ever going to be able to reach our baseline for the industry standard of about 20% canopy cover, it's going to take serious effort to get out there and get a lot of new trees planted. That will be not just public space, that will play a key part, but ultimately private property will also be a significant portion of this, that if we're going to ever accomplish kind of replenishing our canopy, we're going to have to involve private property. But just some quick numbers, if you look on the left-hand side and we establish that 20% baseline for our canopy on the left, carry that over to the right into the other columns, you'll see approximately the number of trees that we would need to plant on an annual basis. There's 4 different columns ultimately, because if you look at the left one where it says the 22.75 feet squared, that is basically our very smallest tree canopies, where they're about 22 feet in either direction for the canopy. It would take almost 22,000 trees annually to be planted of that size to accomplish this 20% goal within the next 30 years. If we shift all the way over to the right-hand column, we can lower that number to 2,000 trees if we're planting much larger canopy trees. The problem is not every location can accommodate a large tree. So what we really have to do here is we're going to have to find a spread where we're planting the right tree for the location. We expect that may be as many as 5,000 or 6,000 trees on an annual basis that eventually need to be planted to kind of help achieve this goal. So again, when we get back to maintenance, this graphic is really kind of intended to share what we're talking about when it comes to our street trees and what may be needed to maintain them on a regular 5 to 7 year cycle. The graphic itself is based off of a 5-year, and it also incorporates those trees which are currently maintained by the property owners. So when we start on that kind of that second column there where we talk about street trees of 270,000, that does include those trees. There's about 230,000, 233 I think is a little closer, in terms of street trees that are maintained by the adjacent property owners. To kind of take those back into the fold, continue to or improve the way we're maintaining our trees that the city of San Jose is responsible for. There's about 270,000 of those. Going to require almost $7 million, just under $7 million, just for the pruning work that might be needed as a maintenance on those. You start to roll in the Parks Department with their 30,000 estimated trees, it's going to require another $750,000. And then you get all the way out to the right, it's about $7.5 million just for maintenance of trees within the public right-of-way and within the park system that San Jose has responsibility for. So, you know, Ryan had thrown out the 20 to 24 million. We realize that's going to be a big ask and it's going to require a lot and may not happen. But ultimately, in the near future, we can take some incremental steps. And these are some of the numbers that we're looking at that'll help kind of guide us in that direction. And hopefully long term, we'll be doing a much better job with our trees that are in the public right of way. So beyond that, when it comes to the outreach and education, we recognize a topic like this, like trees, stirs passion with a lot of people. So it's important to us that we set out with a deep outreach campaign initially. Unfortunately, COVID impacted that plan. In March of 2020, we weren't able to conduct a lot of the in-person meetings that we had originally planned on. So we had to quickly pivot over to a virtual format. When we did that virtual format, we had 4 virtual meetings, included Spanish and American Sign Language interpretation, also had some surveys that we were providing through social media, and we had developed a stakeholder list of several hundred individuals as well as organizations and so forth that we've been trying to reach out to and kind of coordinate all this work with and get an understanding of where they're at. When the first draft of this plan was first released, we also accompanied the posting with a blog post on the DOT website, where we pushed that out through social media, including Nextdoor and so forth, to try and get that to the public so that they knew it was out there available and that we would hopefully be able to kind of receive some feedback from all of them. Subsequent to all of those outreach efforts, we also have spent the last 6 months kind of conducting in-person meetings with a lot of these individual stakeholder groups. As we moved forward, it really became critical for us to kind of seek some of that output. So, you know, some of the groups that we reached out to ultimately were our city forest, Si Se Puede, Open Space Authority, AARP, Audubon Society, Native Plant Society, Spur, just to name a few. There were also Santa Clara League of Women Voters and some others that have provided us some support letters and so forth as we moved through this process. But it's really the key point in all of this outreach that we're talking about is that it's not going to stop upon adoption of this first plan, that we recognize we are going to have to engage the community significantly and provide both them as well as council and this committee perhaps with updates as to kind of how we move forward with that strategic work plan and kind of accomplish this long term. So the last one I will talk to here is our work plan specifically. As Ryan had kind of talked about previously, we've got our strategies outlined on the left-hand column there, where we talk about streamlining, ensuring sustainability, supporting diversity, equity, inclusion, et cetera. As you shift over towards the right, what we have done is outlined these kind of key objectives that will match up to those strategies. As we kind of dig into it a little bit deeper, you can see that the ones that are kind of in that teal, blue, or green are the ones that we've highlighted for more immediate action. As we get into 2022 and into 2024, as we go out a little bit, these are the ones that we feel like need to be prioritized. The ones that are in the darker blue are the ones that we would expect to perhaps tackle a little bit later in the process. But ultimately, even this is something that we will be regularly updating as we talk to the community, as we form this advisory committee and we move forward. All of these priorities and objectives are subject to kind of reprioritization as we kind of dig into it. So those are really the kind of key points with you. I'll turn it back over to John now, and he can kind of share with you the more immediate steps for the next 6 months, I'll say.
Thank you, Russ and Ryan. Yeah, this is the last slide, and I just wanted to recap some of the things that Russ was mentioning with regard to our stakeholders. During the process, especially this last year, we did hear from our stakeholders that they wanted a little bit more time in our process and to incorporate changes that they had recommended both in the text and in the content of the plan. So we actually deferred our bringing this to the T&E committee. Originally, we were supposed to be here in April of this year, so we put it back to now October. So we deferred that 6 months to allow some of that community stakeholder engagement to occur, and then to take a harder look and a closer look at some of the comments that we had received from some of the stakeholders, especially our city forest. So we did also retool our whole community outreach program to actually try to reach more people. As Russ mentioned, some of the stakeholders, we also tried to get to general public through more online, more meetings, blog posts, media inquiries, and trying to answer a lot of questions that way. We hope that that's going to actually continue all the way through this plan, as Russ said, as we form some of the advisory committee and do some other work. So want to continue that, and then obviously bring it back every year to the T&E committee. Some of the key points that we want to really get done, or the objectives over this next year, is we do have some funding to actually go and plant some trees, which we really like to do. So that will occur in this next year. And then Russ mentioned it before, but really form the Community Forest Advisory Committee, which is a key next step for us to prioritize and for us to get into the details of where, how, and what we do for preserving and planting of trees we're going to need more stakeholder assistance and input on that. And then, to get into the real things in the future is we do need some more both staffing and resources to be able to do these things that we want. So we'll be working with our partners and council in terms of the budget process and being able to evaluate those funding options that may get us to that ultimate goal of really trying to have all of the trees maintained properly throughout the city and to preserve what we have, and then add to and grow the canopy in the city of San Jose back to at least the 20%. So want to just wrap up on that slide and those comments, and I think we'll turn it back over to you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll go to members of the public first. First speaker is Cecil Wood-Bensi.
All right. Thank you very much, Tessa Wood-Nancy. Well, I appreciated the report. The issue of putting it into low socioeconomic areas is very good because that is part of our community at risk. But to say our neighborhood too, which is in the beginning of our community at risk from the pollution, the high pollution, starts like on essentially Stockton Avenue and then going east. And so, and most probably it goes down to, the Alameda as well. But if you look at our community at risk that the Bay Area Air Quality Management District has designated through their modeling and research, it definitely includes Stockton Avenue. And that if you model our neighborhood, we see that there's a lot of pollution in the whole neighborhood. There's bus depots, there's cement factories, there's highways. So it's all those impacts. And so we want them in our neighborhood too, even though we're not necessarily a low income neighborhood. And that's what, makes our neighborhood actually, the Garden Alameda, that is part of my neighborhood, is, an unusual neighborhood. That we're not low income, but we're very high impact of pollution from the location. So to include that into the issue is the community at risk and the whole designation of that area, which absolutely includes the east side as well. And so anyway, that was one issue that I was looking at. And then, how to get the trees to be put into the neighborhoods, just really, we see like on Stockton and Taylor, there's a liquor store with no trees, nothing around there. We need to just put those in, and we need to be more adamant about it versus having the permission of the property owners. I think that we need to, and especially like we see that on Stockton Avenue in general in the commercial districts, and the city has done that before where they just put them in and they start watering them themselves, and maybe we can have volunteers.
Next speaker is Juliana Pendleton.
Hello, my name is Juliana Pendleton, and I'm the Environmental Advocacy Assistant for the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. Thank you for providing this report. We supported the CAL FIRE grant to fund the creation of the Community Forest Management Plan, and with the Native Plant Society, we commented on the plan and participated in meetings. We support the plan's intent to protect and increase community trees and canopy. We think budgets and a revised governance are urgently needed to stop the hemorrhage of trees and loss of canopy in San Jose. Planting trees in East San Jose is critically important. However, we are disappointed that the plan lacks a biodiversity goal and other goals that would build upon and implement general plan policies. And thus, we believe the plan is systemically flawed. For example, in Vision 2040 MS 21.1 states, quote, manage the community forest to achieve San Jose's environmental goals for water and energy conservation, wildlife habitat preservation, stormwater retention, heat reduction in urban areas, energy conservation, and the removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, end quote. This means managing and including native trees for their high habitat value. The plan should emphasize habitat value to preserve and enhance wildlife habitat and work in concert with other plans to achieve the goals the general plan seeks. Finally, it would be helpful if all the submitted public comments for the plan were posted onto the Community Forest Management Plan website in order to increase transparency. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Susan Butler Graham.
Hi. I'm Susan Butler Graham, a San Jose mother and grandmother and volunteer leader with Mothers Out Front, Silicon Valley, working toward a livable climate future for all children. I want to address the community outreach effort as it pertains to human health and the importance of engaging community health organizations and organizations representing underserved neighborhoods and communities in the development of the plan. The Health Trust sent a letter to the City Council last month, which states, the Health Trust encourages you to pause adoption of the draft San Jose Community Forestry Management Plan until it reflects greater feedback from diverse stakeholders interested and impacted by it. We approach this topic from the perspective of a local nonprofit focused on building health equity in Silicon Valley. Tree canopy has a significant impact on human health and health equity. Inequitable distribution of tree canopy across the city leads to some neighborhoods with many trees benefiting from cooler summer air temperatures, reduced air pollution, and decreased stress, while communities with fewer trees suffer. Tree canopy can promote physical activity as well by providing shade and a pleasant environment for walking, running, and bicycling. Given the diversity of San Jose, the plan should be well informed by stakeholders from various neighborhoods, racial and ethnic groups, and income levels. Supported partnerships with community-based organizations could help solicit valuable input for the plan. As the Nature Conservancy notes, trees are a valuable tool for improving public health in America's cities. Given the importance of tree canopy on health and well-being, as well as your interest in approaching policy with an equity lens, please pause this process in order to apply that lens. The need for more transparent and robust engagement is needed prior to adopting this plan, and 250 trees is not enough for the east side.
Next speaker is Rhonda Berry.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Rhonda Berry, Chief Executive Officer with our City Forest. For 28 years, we've been working to grow San Jose's urban forest. And because of city budget shortfalls, we've also raised the funds to pay for most of this work, not just thousands of planting projects, but tree care engagement, job training, tree inventories, a nursery, and more. We're clearly a major stakeholder, but DOT advised us in June we were just a planting partner. And this was to explain why OCF wasn't invited to be part of the process beyond an introductory meeting. Clearly, we have not been engaged as a stakeholder, and that remains true today. We asked the consultant about why he hadn't reached out, and he did share that he had been directed as to who to meet with and how often. And we asked DOT, who are the external stakeholders then? Because we think that they're so important. And they wrote back that they had a list, but they couldn't share it with us. DOT now refers to any group or individual in the city as a stakeholder, making the word meaningless as far as scope of responsibility, expertise, and experience goes. And these facts reflect why the plan remains fundamentally flawed and must be paused. The unvetted draft contained 65 damaging inaccuracies about OCF and was kept online without any corrections. And we learned this misinformation was shared around City Hall, and it ended up in the city budget message as well. Our planting rate per tree is 150 to 210 per tree, and if we have a state grant, it's free. But that's not what was reflected in the information. Pointing out omissions in the draft plan has not been received well. The omissions remain. So we request that you pause the process and see that they get addressed. We also request your direct assistance in mitigating the unnecessary harm caused to our city forest. We are looking to you also for reassurance that a partnership with the city does not have to look like this and will not moving forward. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Next speaker is Christina. Christina, you can please unmute. If you're on the phone, you may need to press *6. Christina, we're going to come back to you. Next speaker is Bob Levy.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Bob Levy. I'm currently a member of the Santa Clara County Planning Commission and formerly a member of the San Jose Planning Commission and San Jose Parks Commission. The 95% draft plan is a real improvement over earlier versions. It contains some good information and recommendations. It is, however, an incomplete plan. It does not reflect engagement of key stakeholders, external stakeholders, stakeholders who own or manage approximately 85% of San Jose urban forests. I will comment on just one of the reasons why these stakeholders should be thoughtfully engaged before the adoption of the plan. Let me clarify that by stakeholder, I'm referring to entities that either own or manage significant acreage of land or are otherwise responsible for tree planting and maintenance, not individual homeowners or residents, or organizations that do not include trees as a key element of their mission. Some of these external stakeholders have their own expertise and perspective, which serves to benefit the long-term health of San Jose's community forests. Agencies such as Valley Water, Santa Clara County Parks, the Open Space Authority, Caltrans, PG&E, etc., have a wealth of knowledge and experience on maintaining and planting trees. These agents should be at the table to review and add valuable recommendations and information to the citywide plan before it is adopted. The process missed the opportunity to create buy-in of the best practices by these entities who have influence on the city's forests that we would like to all share and benefit from. Please take a fresh approach and form a temporary stakeholder steering committee. This allows the city to better understand the bigger picture and will cultivate stakeholder partnerships for greener San Jose.
Thank you. Christina, we're going to try you again. You should be able to unmute. Okay, Christina, there may be a problem with your device. It may be beneficial.
Hello, this is Christina. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we got you. Good. Please go forward.
Hello, this is Christina Egan. Can you hear me?
Yes. We can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you. Okay. I don't hear anything. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I'm a board member of our city forest, and our city forest appreciates the city of San Jose's ongoing support, which we have been receiving and leveraging since 1994, as mentioned earlier. OCF has also obtained state grants to fund almost all planting projects, plus federal funding. We ask that you consider pausing this process to allow for other stakeholders to provide greater perspective on this and other recommendations. We would like to be considered to play more of a role in this whole program and process. One of OCH's strengths is that we not only are positioned to plant trees for San Jose streets and parks, but also for the schools in all 19 school districts as funding allows. The County of Santa Clara is also a funder helping us plant trees in San Jose. Because of this pilot project, we've been able to increase more stipends of our full-time service members from 20,000 to 25,000 and add more trees in East San Jose. We are seeing interest from city staff to start similar programs. OCF has the professionalism. We have been planting trees in San Jose for 27 years. We caution against reinventing a program which could be a much higher cost to taxpayers. We ask for the opportunity to join further in the discussions and assist with planning, showing OCF's expertise. Thank you so much for your consideration and time today.
Thank you. Next speaker is Lillian.
Yes, thank you. You know, I had the hardest time finding you guys on my phone, but thank goodness, Matt Mayhem. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank goodness Matt Mayhem had the, chutzpah, as they say, to allow people to know that this meeting was taking place. But basically, I'm calling in because you mentioned things like pavement, paving streets. Well, that takes away from the environmental aspect of planting in the good faith of planting trees. I mean, you have the money to pave trees, to pave, excuse me, to pave the streets, but not to plant the trees. I'm just calling in because I see a lot of development going on. I see a lot of areas cornered off by fences. There are signs saying there's going to be something, you know, developed there, and yet there are heritage trees in those zones. There are ordinance trees in those zones, and they will be cut down because, according to what these gentlemen talked about earlier, because of the discombobulation of all the different groups within the city, there's no real what I call penalty for cutting down a tree. There might be a fine, but there's no real penalty. And I watched a program on TV the other day, and there's a particular city in Africa where if you cut a tree down, you are banished from that city. Now that may sound silly, but we do love our trees. Many of us are hippies way back from the 60s. We're called tree huggers. So what? They're important to have. I see hundreds and hundreds of apartment complexes going up and not one tree. And that's a real shame if you call San Jose a tree-loving kind of a city and put it on the map as such and not having any trees. But anyway, thank you, Deb Davis, for having the highest canopy of all the districts. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Next speaker is Victoria.
Hi, my name is Vicki Moore. I'm currently the chair of the Santa Clara County Planning Commission, and thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I'd like to make a comment focusing on CAL FIRE's role and their grant requirements for the plan. We think that endorsing this and moving this plan forward with some of the glaring omissions and deficiencies originally identified by CAL FIRE quite a few months ago is very problematic. There's a disconnect here. CAL FIRE, among other comments, said that there needed to be, as part of the development of the plan, an external stakeholder process, an authentic engagement over a period of time with stakeholders involved in the urban canopy, in that 85% of the city that we're talking about, not under the city's purview. And in addition, it is meant to be a comprehensive plan. Seems to be a disconnect in that currently the plan is focused almost entirely on the city's own jurisdiction. Comprehensive plan means bringing all the players together who are responsible for 100% of the tree canopy. Big disconnect there. I hope that you all received the Coalition to Advance Urban Forestry letter signed by a number of representatives, including State Senator Cortese, Linda Lizotte from the Valley Water, Sierra Club, 350 Silicon Valley, Mothers Out Front, Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful, etc. And this letter also reiterates not only the breadth of support for pausing the process, but also just shows you the breadth of interest in this very important topic. So we urge you to pause the process and develop a comprehensive stakeholder engaged plan.
Next speaker is Blair Beekman.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. Thank you that, this was an issue that's been in the works for a few years now, and that had much previous argument from Kerry Romanoff about the environmental issues of it. I think we're moving past that stage and we're heading into just what can be good tree planting for the east side. I noticed from your heat map that it seems that, there's just a natural way that, the heat issues of the west side of San Jose are different than the east side, and they always have been. The way the flora and fauna has grown naturally, is my guess. I hope you can continue to respect what was the flora and fauna of the east side and how you'll be planting the future of trees. And I think there can be ways to create a biodiversity set of ideas that can create cooling ideas with east side practices. or with East Side flora and fauna, that was probably there, at the time of Ohlone time, or to consider the time of Ohlone time. With 48 seconds, with all of this said, I think, I've been offering for months now the concept of we have to possibly be preparing for earthquake ideas in the next few years. So it's like you can do some of these ideas now, but the main things of this can be done after the time of earthquake. Now, boy, I just put that out there as a way to understand and describe the situation. Is this accurate? Can I get some help? If I start writing to yourselves as city government, can I start getting some facts if I'm offering good help to this idea? So we are understanding how to better talk about this subject clearly and not be confused. That's my goal in this efforts. Thank you.
Next speaker is Roland.
Thank you. Now, before moving on to my comments, I'm extremely concerned about what I heard from City Forest, which I actually quoted to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors 3 months ago as a good example of city forest management. They were very interested in the price point at $75 per tree versus, I think it was 3,000. And for the record, I'm the one that watered the baby oak trees on Curie Drive when they planted them. But moving to my comments here, where are property owners going to plant trees if we eliminate single-family housing? Second, as already mentioned, trees need water. I haven't heard anything about water in this presentation. Most trees have large root systems which are injurious to adjacent infrastructure. I'll give you 2 examples. I've just had to pay the city $250 in sidewalk repairs, and the large canopy tree in my neighbor's backyard just caused $15,000 worth of damage to my pool. Collaboration with other entities. You heard about the county. How about Marshall County? There's 240 acres there that look like absolute landscape. Why don't we have canopy trees? PG&E, the right of way to the city of San Jose runs into the thousands of acres, and we are unable to grow any canopy trees under there. If we undergrounded those high voltage power lines, we would be able to grow canopy trees above them. And that concludes my remarks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next speaker is Barbara Marshman.
Thank you. I'm Barbara Marshman. I'm the former editorial page editor of the San Jose Mercury News. And one of the things I've written about for some 30 years is the tree canopy in San Jose and the importance of it. I'm joining others here to ask you to put this plan on hold and go back and engage the serious stakeholders in this, not people like me who know some facts and care, but the people with expertise and with money, with resources, with staffs who can actually help the city. One of the most convincing things about the presentation today was how poor in resources the city programs have been, and how scattered the management is at this time. And I know San Jose does not have a huge budget, but that's all the more reason to engage people like the Water District. They do have the money. If you wanted to do a planning program to allow people to water trees, the way our city forest recruits people to water trees, then the Water District are essential partners to have at the beginning, at the ground floor, not the same going out for advice after the fact. Very different to develop partnerships at the beginning so that in starting this daunting new project to finally have a tree program, you can do it with the best resources and the best advice and the best partnerships you can get. Thank you.
Thank you. Wyan Trong.
Hello?
Hello. We can hear
Okay,
you now.
good. Great. I'm Wyan Tro with Mothers Out Front Silicon Valley for a Livable Climate for All Children. In our climate work, we've become aware of how trees play a key role in the health and well-being of a community and help mitigate the heat island effects that will increase with the climate crisis. Redlining has prevented neighborhoods such as East San Jose from getting nearly as many trees as more affluent, mostly white neighborhoods. This makes poorer neighborhoods less walkable in the intense heat of the summer and raises utilities bills for cooling residents. Trees increase foot traffic, which is good for business in those neighborhoods. It is essential to get input from historically disenfranchised neighborhoods. Additionally, our city forest has done years of good work in this area and should be included and listened to. I urge you to put this process on hold so that genuine community and stakeholder engagement can unfold in a respectful manner. A delay now will mean a far better future for our urban forest. A community education, outreach, and engagement effort that is reaching out to people where they are in a language they can understand literally and figuratively, and with ample opportunities for members of the public to provide input. It is very important to obtaining a broad base of community buy-in and engagement, particularly from those who have been historically left out. Both stakeholders and community members need to be authentically engaged. Thank you.
Thank you. Roma Dawson?
Thank you very much. And first, I want to thank Mr. Allen and Dudek for pulling together the SWOT analysis and this document. It identifies some shortcomings that have frustrated me for decades, and it's very satisfying to see it pulled together with a work plan. I do wonder if there is possibly a way to move forward with this document if some council members can step up and provide some very clear direction to staff to correct some of the inequities that exist in it currently, which exists primarily with the lack of appropriate outreach to key stakeholders and to the general public. So I sort of throw that out as an idea and hope some of you can work to make this happen. I very much, for me, this is about two things. It's about doing what we can on climate change and equity. And happily, you are in control of the urban canopy in the city of San Jose. This is something you can actually take action to improve. I also want to call out the issue of equity, and regardless of what happens in this city, it seems to always be District 7 at the bottom of the stack. I also am concerned that there may be inequity in terms of how current street trees are pruned among homeowners, individual homeowners, particularly those first-time home buyers that are stuck with huge bills. I would also like to urge you to expedite the formation of the Community Forest Advisory, CFAC, I think you're calling it. Expedite this. It is too long to wait to the end of June 2022. I think if you got this going immediately, pulled it forward for action, you could solve some of the complaints that you're hearing right now. At the end of June 2022, it is too long to wait. I do appreciate greatly the openness to the reformation of the org chart, because the reformation of governance structure is so critical. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Caller ending in 5140.
Yeah, I like what the previous caller, Roland, I think, said about, it takes water, it takes maintenance, it takes money to maintain a tree. I don't think everybody realizes that. You need to plant the trees properly and have them deep water. They need to be deep water. There has to be like a pipe that goes, subterranean to be able for this whole thing to work. I mean, as for CAL FIRE, you know what CAL FIRE needs to do? They need to learn how to put out fires, like at Mount Hamilton. I knew a guy who lived up there. CAL FIRE couldn't even get up there. For whatever reason, a lot of his buildings burned down because CAL FIRE was just not very good. Like many things in California, terrible. And so, yeah, I don't think you people realize, you're going to give out a little bit of money here or there to plant some crappy tree that's going to raise up the sidewalks and ruin people's swimming pools. You don't get it. And the stupid trees that are approved, I mean, the one color in the white neighborhood, hey, come to my white neighborhood and take out a tree that is dropping sap and these little prickly balls and everything else. And I'm really tired about people talking about white. Tell me, hey, what language do they speak in white? What country is white? Okay? It's racist what people are saying like that. I can't help it that in my neighborhood, I've got trees. I don't even like them. I wish I would tear them all out because they clog the gutters. They lift up the sidewalks, like everything I said. It drops debris. It clogs the drains. Hey, you can come to my white neighborhood anytime and enjoy the trees and walk around in this supposed shaded area. Big deal. I'll tell you what, get rid of the trees. We need the water. How about that? I'd like anybody on the city council to answer me the questions about what it's going to cost in the future to maintain all these trees. Oh, here's $75.
Next speaker is Zoom user. Please unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hello, thank you.
Oh, okay. I guess I must be the Zoom user. I'm trying to find where to put my name in there. Can you just give me a second here?
You can just start speaking. You can change it later, or just let us know if you'd like to let us know your name.
My name is Richard Stewart. Okay, my name is Richard Stewart. I am a board member of our city forest. Our board chair, Irma Valderas, was unable to be here due to her family emergency, so I'm stepping in to read her remarks. Thank you for listening today. Our city's forest has been working tirelessly for decades to green San Jose. I know because in 1995, our city forest planted trees at my school in East San Jose, where I was the principal. Through these years, most of our work has been funded by partners we have brought to help us grow and steward San Jose urban forests. These are significant partners from the state, federal, and county. That's 28 years of competing for grants to help San Jose and also doing the work we have performed so well for our grantees that these partners continue to want to invest in San Jose through us again and again. In our opinion, this is your best urban forest story. It's an effective, fruitful partnership we can be proud of. Yet our city forest has no seat at the table for this draft plan. Instead, it has its reputation harmed by inaccurate data and misinformation, including our role in the process. This has continued throughout today. This was unnecessary and has prevented you from getting the accurate and helpful information you need. We're asking you to end this and put in place an unbiased process for the better community forestry plan for San Jose. Thank you.
Next speaker is Virginia Holtz. You appear to be unmuted, Virginia. We cannot hear you. Virginia? I'm going to turn to my colleagues. Virginia, if you'd like to try again, please put your hand up again, and I'll, after the first speaker, I'll try you again. Councilmember Perales.
Thank you, Chairwoman. So I want to start off by saying I think staff and our consultant here on this report, a lot of alarming information, unfortunately, through the report. I think, I had a surface level understanding of, I think, how poor our tree canopy was, but I was not aware of the dire straits that we're in, and quite frankly, the loss of coverage that we've had I'll say that I wasn't surprised on the disparaging sort of coverage, canopy coverage from East San Jose and West San Jose. But when you look at it as a whole, our city is overall doing rather poorly, and we've each district across the city has lost coverage over the last number of years. And the other alarming statistic here was the investment that we'll have to make to really achieve better coverage, whether it's the 20% or the annual pruning cycles, or just the pruning cycle in itself. The dollar investment that's going to take, looking at the comparative graph that you showed for San Francisco, Sacramento, LA, and really just where we're at. It's embarrassing to see how little investment we have identified for our tree canopy and maintenance, tree maintenance, you name it. So the data that was able to be achieved here in the report to paint that picture, although it's a terrible picture, it was helpful for me to really get a better in-depth understanding of the challenges that we face, and ultimately the investment that we're going to have to make. And I know we have discussions going about a bond potentially for next year, Parks bond, and I know that I understand that's how some other cities have identified funding for their annual pruning budgets. And I think that that's something that obviously we'll have to highly consider as well, especially considering that the small dollar amount we have today allocated to this. Any improvement would be better, but I think it would be best if we can really identify a number that would get us to actually achieve that 20% goal and improve the canopy in each district throughout the entire city, but specifically I think where we know we have the greatest need, which is the entirety of East San Jose. So I just want to say thank you for that again. The feedback obviously that we've heard, and I've heard this as well, I've had independent meetings with stakeholders that have asked, and as we've heard today, have asked that we hit the pause button and that we look to gain some more insight from them, from specific stakeholders, and be able to see what adjustments are necessary for the plan itself. And so I did want to ask staff, because my understanding is we have the CAL FIRE grant here. There's a timeline there, and I know that we extended it already. So first question is in regards to that grant, what kind of extension, what length of extension does staff think is still possible if we were to further try and get some more input?
Thank you, Councilmember John Rista, Director again. And so, yes, to inform everybody, this project was funded primarily from a CAL FIRE grant, which has grant requirements of what we would incorporate in the plan and what the components of the plan are, as well as deadlines for grants. So we were running up against that deadline, and when we extended this plan the 6 month, we were kind of pushing to the end of that grant period. So we've been in contact with CAL FIRE a number of times, making sure we were meeting all of their grant requirements and the timing. Having said that, if there is a need for us to extend, right now we have planned that we would be bringing this to council, I believe, on November 30th. If we need to extend that a little bit, we could go back to CAL FIRE, and if it's not a real long extension, I think they would probably want to make sure that we have all the input needed for council to make a final decision on. So if we wanted to extend it into December, in one of the council meetings in December, for us to then go and reach out to some of the more recent letter writers, we could probably do that, and we could confirm that that would be fine with CAL FIRE. So I don't think a couple of weeks or something like that may make a big difference to them. Hope that answers your question if you're looking for other information on that.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think the only thing I'd like to understand further is a more definitive answer in regards to, how much time would there really be? Because I am interested personally, I'll tell you, in trying to solicit some more feedback from the stakeholders that you heard from today and those that have obviously sent in letters, in seeing if we can't, obviously gather as much of that feedback as possible. This, I think, is a very important plan and report, and we're getting some criticism. So I think that it's wise to try and pause and see if we can't hear that and then adjust accordingly. But at the same time, I don't want to make a demand on, hey, let's go out and spend, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it may be, if indeed we're now bumping up against a deadline concern. So I think just a more definitive answer, and if you don't have that today, that's fine. But I do think that, that would be my interest, would be, well, let's find out exactly what we think this deadline is. And look, I understand at times it could be flexible, right? Where you ask and maybe the CAL FIRE grantee here says, well, how much time do you need? So understand it could be a bit of a back and forth. So I will just say my interest is that we do pause at the moment, and that we do actually try to go have some direct engagement with the stakeholders that we've heard from more recently, and those that we heard from today, and then see if if it's just a couple weeks, we think we can go and have these conversations and come back in December before our December break. I think that would be great, and if we can get that feedback from CAL FIRE to determine if that's going to affect the grant or not, that would be great. But if it looks like, hey, there's maybe we might need a couple more weeks and that's rushing it, and maybe CAL FIRE says, look, we can extend it to January, that's the kind of definitive I think response I'd like to see. And I don't think I guess we do have an opportunity to come back next month, right? But you can also, I think, resolve it through just outreach to the council to say, hey, we were able to pause it for this long. We're going to come back, in December to meet the qualifications for the grant, or we're going to come back in January. So that would be my interest. I'll pause on, making a motion and would like to hear what my colleagues have to say, but that would be my interest and my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Cohen.
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to thank all of the staff and all of the work that went into putting this together. This is seeing all of this data and all the work that has to be done, and the hole that we're in on this topic is quite a discouraging thing. We're so far behind in where we need to be that it's hard to really figure out how we get to where we need to go. I did the math, when I saw this, was reading through this report, and after the presentation I had with you, the discussion I had with you last week, I think if we spend 12 hours a day planting trees, we probably have to plant at least one tree an hour every day, 7 days a week, all year long, to meet the goals and start today. So, certainly one of my interests is not to sit here and say, well, let's spend one more month studying what we have to do. We know that one thing we have to do is start planting trees. So no matter what we do starting now, we shouldn't delay planting trees, because what we usually do with our tree planting is, handful of trees here, a handful of trees there. That's not going to cut it. That's sort of thought number one. We also need to figure out tree maintenance strategy, which clearly is, I'm not sure how we go from here to there in terms of how we maintain our trees. And there's multiple elements to that. One is the residential tree maintenance issue, which I'm not sure there's a lot of education needs to be done with our residents in the city, as far as what their obligations are, but also how to make it easier for them to maintain their trees, right? It's not just about telling them what they have to do, but how we facilitate that. And then working with businesses in San Jose, they've got trees too, and their trees need to be maintained, and there's an education piece there as well. And then the city tree maintenance program that's clearly way behind where it needs to be. It's interesting, I was at the League of Cities meeting a couple weeks ago, and I came upon a company that does tree maintenance, and they said, oh, we used to do all the street tree maintenance for San Jose, and then the city at some point decided we weren't going to use these kind of services. We were going to leave it up to residents to maintain their own trees, and those contracts kind of went away. in the meantime, I'm not sure that we're, as we can see, we're losing a large number of our tree cover. I don't know if there's a correlation or not. Obviously, we have a lot of other issues related to drought and water and everything else, and tree diseases. But are we spending our resources in the right place as far as trying to preserve our street cover? Right? Are we being penny wise, pound foolish as far as our contracts for keeping our street tree maintenance and our residential tree maintenance? So we have to really think a lot of these things through as we move forward with this plan. So anyway, those are kind of my high level thoughts on this. I want to thank all of the stakeholders who spoke today and have spoken to me a lot over the course of the last few months on this plan. I know that a lot of them have a lot of great ideas and a lot of knowledge about the subject, and we need to certainly listen to the stakeholders on this topic. I hear things about the types of tree mix and what types of trees we need to preserve, and there's discussions about what percentage of oak is the right percentage, and all those kind of questions that we need to resolve and work on and figure out. So the first question I have, the plan has an advisory group that will be part of the process going forward. Is that right?
Yes, that is one of the first steps that we identified in that one of the final slides is actually form a stakeholder advisory committee. I think it was Russ that was going through all the advice and input in the detail. Some of the things you just mentioned, the detail of how we're going to prioritize, where we're going to identify all the plantings, how we're going to, there's a lot of best practices that we want to be engaging on this. But you're right, we were hoping to be able to move forward and start to do these things, plant trees, set up the advisory committee, start working through the work plan, and of course, bring this back on an annual basis to this committee and council. So all of the things you were observing really were something that we wanted to get started with the work plan and the adoption of the plan.
And what will be the makeup of that advisory committee, and how will that be determined?
Well, I think that is something that we've actually started to have a conversation with our city forest about that, who they would think that they would think that would make sense to be on that. And I think it would be some of the community the community organizations within some of the neighborhood areas, especially those that are the ones that we're really going to need to target. Some of our funding partners, perhaps, some of the other technical people that might be of interest to help out with some of the technical decisions on this. So we could have a number of different types of groups that could be represented within that. So one of the next things is we're going to be starting to form what the ideas of what that committee would look like and how it might function, how often it meets, and that sort of thing. So we're starting that work now, and the sooner we get this adopted and move forward with it, I think it would be beneficial.
And so I imagine many of those stakeholder groups that spoke today and that have weighed in on this process would be part of that advisory.
Yeah, and we already have met with a number of stakeholder groups. I think one of the slides pointed that out. We'd be more than happy to meet with anyone else that is interested in this. And as Councilmember Prowls pointed out, the signatories on that most recent letter, love to meet with them and go through this too. And I'm sure the folks on that letter probably have a lot of input in terms of what would make up a really good stakeholder committee as well.
Okay, and then how final and static is this plan? I mean, so if the plan were to get approved, it seems to me there's a lot of elements of the plan that can be fluid as the committee moves forward, right?
Absolutely. So remember, what this initially was really to take that hard look at what we are doing now that isn't really getting us where we want to be. So it was really that independent hard look at how the city is addressing us, as well as any of our partners, so that we can come up with ideas that actually then would be able to implement. So the first part of that was the major effort that DUDEC did was really the SWOT analysis. We do have some goals and objectives within there too, and then also the work plan, and you saw some of the elements of that on one of the slides. So to answer your question, this is going to be quite full. We're going to have to bring this back every year for both funding and appropriations from the council, further direction on where priorities may be in terms of how we're going to do this. We heard some things about some of the plant diversity. I'm not the expert here, but that is certainly things that we need to take into consideration that would then come and be put into our best management practices. So there's quite a bit that we could still be working on while an annual basis of work goes forward and the plan is implemented, and then it's fluidly brought back and changes made as we go.
There's a whole lot of budget work that then the council has to do in terms of, are we going to expand our, add an arborist? Are we going to fund more maintenance? Or, I mean, there's so many pieces of this that are going to require so many different pieces of input from different places as we move forward. But I mean, I don't really want to weigh in on the question of how well were stakeholders engaged and why did this communication break down and what were the problems as far as working between all the different groups. But my thinking is we want to proceed, move forward, and get those stakeholders engaged through this advisory group and allow for the process for the plan to be fluid and keep adjusting based on input from stakeholders who have a lot of expertise and get moving on implementing some of the things we know we can start with, some of the holes we can start to fill, and yet, adjust as we go, because we're not going to get to any kind of resolution on our tree cover issue in a month, 6 months, or even 2 years. So, it's not clear to me what another month of stakeholder engagement buys us in this process that won't happen after the plan is in place. And then I'm only going to also just point out, and we talk a lot about East San Jose, it strikes me that it's interesting to me, and maybe not all that surprising, that North San Jose seems to be actually the worst off of any place in the city. And as somebody who knows it well, think about it, there really aren't that many trees up there. As you walk around North San Jose, it's a wasteland of trees. So I hope that we'll focus a lot on that part of the city, especially as we start to build there. This makes me think that as we move forward with development, that an important part of all of our development plans has to be to make sure that tree cover is really integrated into all of the future development plans as we do more density, as we build more apartment complexes, as we build out in that area. And so, that bright red part of the map, which is North San Jose District 4, down below 11% tree cover, there's a lot we can do up there. Also, we keep talking about not having enough money to build the parks in North San Jose. One of the problems with that is that therefore we don't have enough trees in North San Jose, because those parks, those big open spaces, which are supposed to be parks in the future, are areas where we're going to have trees someday. But if it takes 10 years to build those parks, it's going to take 10 years to get those trees. So we're going to have to figure out how to fund those parks so we can get trees up there in North San Jose. And I suppose other parts of the city that may be waiting for their parks to come too. But these things are all connected. And then again, that's another part of the city where we need to enlist our business community, maybe talk to some of our tech organizations like Silicon Valley Leadership Group and say to them, hey, this is important to all of us. They're a group that I think would understand the need. I know that Google, as part of their new campus in Alviso, is actually taking out part of their parking lot to build a green space with more trees, because that's important to them. But that's not true of all the companies up there. And so we need to maybe work with those companies and say, can we work with you, get some of your financial investment to put trees as an important public service of your business up in that part of the city. And that could happen downtown, that could happen in North San Jose, that could happen in places where these companies have a lot of campuses with space where we can put in trees. So I think we should be looking at that as well as we're talking about improving our tree cover across the city. And then one last question. We're building this climate core now for cleaning up the city and paying people to do environmental work. Can we maybe enlist the climate core to be doing tree plantings as part of their charge?
I don't believe that we are. Our partner, our city forest, does engage a lot of volunteer work, and that's how they're able to get a lot of work done. I don't know if that core that's being developed through that is part of that group or not, but we can certainly find out. And I'm sure they're, looking for volunteers. There's probably never enough. So anywhere where we could bring that in, that would probably be beneficial.
Okay. All right, that's it for my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to go back to Virginia Holtz, the member of the public who was not able to unmute earlier. She had her hand up. If we can get Virginia. Virginia, you need to unmute.
I cannot unmute.
Now we can hear you.
Oh, you can?
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. This has been a long afternoon. Thank you for enduring. Lots of information, community input from the various interested parties. I'm Virginia Holtz, former Parks Commissioner, former Director on the Open Space Authority. I just wanted to say one thing that I noticed as I was listening to the presentation and the slide that talked about all the different partners and departments in the city that are related and have connections to the trees. It just seems that there's a disconnect because when you look at the immediate implementation of the plan or in your goals, there's no direct statement that says there will be collaboration, coordination on a regular basis with those departments within the city. It's so easy for cities in each department to become a silo. And I think for the success of this plan and for the implementation, it needs all the coordination within the city on a regular basis so that you can hear the disparate voices of what each department is having to deal with and come to some agreement. An advisory committee is wonderful, but they don't have the power to implement. And I think that you need a committed effort of a committee of the council, or not the council, of the departments heads or their staff to meet on a regular basis. Thank you.
Thank you. Turning back to my colleagues, Councilmember Esparza.
Thank you. I also wanted to thank city staff for all their hard work on this. Particularly during COVID, I know a lot of the staff members that worked on this were pulled out to work on COVID response, and then were pulled back in to do additional work on this. And so that's very much appreciated. I wanted to address a couple of things on the meetings. Did we meet with PG&E and Valley Water specifically?
John Risto again. We received comment letter from Valley Water. I don't think my understanding is I don't think they were really interested or felt the need to meet with us, but we did receive comment. PG&E, I'm going to have to ask Russ if he knows if we received anything from PG&E. I do not know that.
We did not receive anything from PG&E. We have semi-regular meetings with them, but ultimately nothing specific to the management plan in detail.
Okay, but they are aware of this work and they chose not to submit comment. Is that correct or no?
That's what is assumed. Yes, they are aware.
Okay, great. And I also wanted to thank you during that sort of extra time that city staff met with community groups, in particular the Si Se Puede Collective. And I heard good feedback about that meeting. So I wanted to thank you for that. And I also wanted to remind folks that stakeholders include residents, right? I think somehow that gets forgotten a little bit, and that you're a stakeholder, whether you own your own home, whether you live in an apartment, all of those things make you a stakeholder in your community, in your neighborhood. And I bring that up because I have a lot of residents. District 7 has been really hit very hard by COVID, health-wise, but also economically. And it's already a very high needs district before COVID. And so people are focused on survival right now. And then for those that, especially this past year, that have encountered issues with trees, in some cases in my community, residents view it cheaper to pull out a tree and pay a fine than to figure out how to keep the tree, right? And we need to change that dynamic, but we need to do it in a way that brings people along. I want more trees, right? I want more trees for District 7. Unfortunately, District 4 is the top of the list when it comes to needing more in the urban canopy, but District 7 is number 2. And so a lot of my residents also have reached out to me because they don't have the money to maintain those trees. They don't have the money to water them. They don't have the money to fix sidewalks. And so these things lead neighborhoods who need trees, who want trees, it leads neighborhoods to look at trees as being kind of a negative because of the work and the money that's involved. And we need to change that conversation because communities like District 7, and I notice, we have industrial areas in the city that are under canopied, but go to a neighborhood in District 7, ironically named 7 Trees, right? And it is 15 degrees hotter there than it is in other parts of the city. You just bake. And, in addition to climate change and all the other reasons why we need trees, having that positive environment says a lot, right? It makes you feel better to be outside, it makes you feel better about your community. So this is something I really do want to get figured out. And I wanted to give my take on sort of the cohort of partners that we move forward. I'd like to see more partners that look like residents of District 7. I would like to also see partners where they bring expertise on certain pieces of how we address the urban canopy. I think Councilmember Cohen mentioned our businesses, or I think both Councilmember Perales and Councilmember Cohen mentioned businesses, right? They're key stakeholders in maintaining swaths of property, in having particularly business owners. We talk a lot about this at council, business owners in District 7 that may speak English as a second language, the way a lot of our small businesses do business a little bit differently than more established parts of town. And this has been an issue in La Placita and Little Saigon, Center Road, making sure that we get information out to those small businesses and property owners, letting them know how we're here to work with them. I think that's really important. But I also want to make sure that we bring on partners who are good at community outreach, right? Some partners are good at planting. Other partners are good at the education component. Other partners might be stronger on the business component. I think it's unrealistic to expect any one organization, including the city, to bring all of those areas of expertise. And so I also wanted to explicitly, I just mentioned it, but I wanted to explicitly mention how important equity is in making a difference in our urban canopy. And that's not just sort of wagging a finger at somebody, it's how to work with them, how to address their fears and their concerns, and provide them the support to do that, to bring them on board, to get them to see, hey, to not worry about surviving, to not worry about paying their water bill, to not worry about that it costs $1,000 to, get some trees fixed. That's money, a lot of my residents just don't have. And so, for me, those are aspects of equity that go into adding to the urban canopy. And I also wanted to make a comment in that I hope that this process can move forward and we can get more input through the committee so that we can get to a place where we need to be in a parks bond. And so I think at the city, we've talked about the parks bond many times at city council about the need to do one in 2022. And to me, digging into this a little bit is a key component of being able to support this work, because we know we just don't have the money, right? We don't have the money, and this park bond is an important piece of it. And in order to develop a plan and in order to make commitments to voters, we need to be able to dig into it. And so it's with that reasoning that I'll make a motion to refer this to the full council after DOT has some conversations with CAL FIRE and includes in what comes to council what that input process will be, whether it needs to be extended or whether we are able to expand the committee aspect of it to get the kind of feedback that we need. And that's the motion.
Second.
Councilmember Esparza, when you're talking about committee, do you mean the advisory group of stakeholders?
Yes, sorry, the advisory group. Yeah.
Just wanted to be clear that it wasn't going to be coming back here.
Correct. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Councilmember Foley.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the presentation, the city staff for all the work that you've done, and those members of the public who called in with their comments. Before I get to my questions, Councilmember Esparza, does your motion include pausing, or your motion is authorization to move forward to come to council with the November 30th timeline that John Risto was mentioning?
So I was building on what Councilmember Peralez said in terms of, I think a conversation with CAL FIRE needs to take place, but I do feel that ultimately this needs to come to the full council so that this process can move forward. I think along the lines of Councilmember Cohen's comments. So I want this, I don't want to stop. I'd like this to move forward, but I think some conversations need to take place while that happens.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Then I'm going to support the motion. I do have some questions. The report was very detailed. I really appreciate it. It's really alarming that we only have one arborist who deals with all of the trees in the city of San Jose. That's just incredible that you can do any work in a city as large, geographically large as the city of San Jose. I'm a little concerned. Two issues concern me. Well, probably more than that, but a couple that I mentioned. And one is the governance structure, how many departments are involved in planting trees, maintaining trees. That just seems unsustainable. So when this comes to council, will it include a recommendation on how we can streamline our trees?
Yes.
And the planting?
Yeah, that is one of the work plan items, is to get a handle of our own selves. And the reason Russ put that slide up to show all the boxes was exactly what you took away from it, which was, geez, there's a lot of people involved with a little finger of this and that all over the place, and we do need to figure out a better organization to manage and grow the canopy. So the answer to your question is yes, one of the work plan items is to bring some suggestions of different ways of managing the trees in the city.
I think that's really important because as one caller mentioned, we have all these silos, and all these people, all these staff members in these silos are responsible for trees. But for some of them, trees may not be planting trees and maintaining trees may not be their number one priority. There may be 100 other things that they're tasked with, and just making sure that trees are planted is one small one. So I think streamlining that and making that more effective and efficient will be a good use of staff resources and time and money. So the proposal includes, and we budgeted to plant 250 trees in East San Jose, which I completely support. But I'm concerned about, these are trees that will be in the public right of way.
That's correct.
Okay, so then we will be responsible for maintaining them, watering them, making sure that they're maintained over time and they survive.
Yeah, yes, the answer is yes, because many of these are going to end up in medians, which is what we the city has responsible for that. What I don't know is there may be some locations that would be abutting, property owners that may then ultimately have to, but Russ can clarify. I don't think we've got fully identified every location of planting yet, so I can partially answer your question. Probably can't fully answer it yet, but.
Russell, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick, absolutely. As it's laid out currently, every single one of those 250 trees is anticipated to be in the public right of way where we would be responsible for maintenance.
Thanks, Russ.
Okay, that's important because I was concerned that they might be in the private right of way or the private park strips, and that then the homeowner, property owner, or tenant are responsible for watering the trees, and then we're in a drought, and they will not want to be increasing their water bill by watering trees that the city is requiring that we plant. And I think historically our tree canopy is going away because people are saying, I don't want to deal with the tree. It dug up my sidewalk and that cost me a lot of money to repair. Now I need to put in a tree that the city says I put in, but that was the problem in the beginning. And then I'm going to have to maintain it. So I'm just going to pull it out and hope that the city doesn't notice. And many times the city doesn't notice. Other times it does. So we need to get a handle on the private trees, tree canopy as well. The map was not surprising where we're lacking trees. The alarming number, District 4, District 7, you drive around and you can see that. I didn't know, Maya, or Councilmember Esparza, that the temperature was so much higher in certain areas. That makes it very difficult to live and affects our quality of life and your residents' quality of life. So I'm all for increasing the urban canopy. I just want to, and I'm glad that we're still that the grant is still available and that CAL FIRE isn't pulling funds. I'm a little concerned about the relationship with our city forest, and I'm just going to throw it out there. What seems to be a negative relationship right now, but we really depend on each other. They're a partner. So how do we make sure that we bring them in as a stakeholder and embrace them as the important community partner that they are?
You're right. Our city forest is probably the key community partner when it comes to tree planting, and that's what we want to make sure that we organize around that, because they are very key to actually have success in terms of planting and trying to get to this. So we will certainly do that, and that's what we wanted to make sure that was in our work plan, and that was identified as an important element of success, is actually enhancing and expanding that relationship with our city forest.
Okay, great. That's important. The numbers around pruning, I found interesting that that pruning actually increases the effects of the urban canopy. I didn't know that. Do we have a system to educate property owners or educate businesses on the correct way to prune? Because it seems that PG&E comes in and prunes and they cut off the top of the tree. And that's, first of all, it's ugly. Second of all, it's really not maintaining the urban canopy. So do we have code restrictions on tree trimming, and how do we get the word out to the businesses who are doing these stream trimming to do it properly.
Russ, you might want to do that one. That's probably something you can handle.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, John. So short answer is we are not doing enough. That is just yet another area where we are under-resourced. That our city forest has done the best they can with the resources they have, and we've tried to supplement that. We also, as a part of our permitting process, permits are required when it comes to trees within the public right-of-way, not so much on private property, but on public right-of-way, we absolutely require permit. If they obtain a permit prior to doing the work, we do our best to include some basic information, some guidelines, some recommendations, reaching out to professionals. We try to guide them to ISA certified professionals that are going to be better able to do what's proper. Unfortunately, no, we're not doing enough. I guess that's the short answer, is that we need to improve that program significantly if we're going to leave trees as the responsibility of the property owner in the right of way. We have to expand and improve that program.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Well, I support the motion. I support increasing our urban canopy. It looks like we need so much more money than we have available right now. The 250 trees are just a dent. I will mention that in the budget session, I requested funding for $20,000, which also isn't a lot, to create a grant process where residents in the city of San Jose could apply for a grant to plant a tree. We haven't, my office is facilitating it. We haven't figured out how to work out the details yet, but much like I had a camera rebate program, it'll be much like that. A little bit different than that one. That was open only to D9 residents, and this is open to anyone in the city. So when it's available and rolled out, I will let you all know, but 20,000 will not go very far given the tremendous need, but again, it's citywide. And with that, that concludes my comments and my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Cohen?
Yeah, just quickly, I was just going to say, I'm going to make it a commitment that when I talk with developers and businesses and others in my district, that I'll just talk about the importance of this work and the way they can partner with us. You know, I always ask questions of developers about what they're doing in certain areas and what they're going to do as far as trees is one of the questions that I ask. And so maybe we can all ask those questions when we're talking about new developments. I will say that we opened the first DHL in the Bay Area in our district, and what DHL did as far as part of their opening was partner with our city forest to give out trees to residents that came by their business on that first day they were open. So they were creative. They thought they came up with that idea, but we can maybe be creative about things that we can do in our communities to get more trees out to residents in the city. So I just wanted to mention some of those things that we should be thinking about as ways that we can do this, not just as a city responsibility, but partnering with others in our community.
Thank you. I also want to thank the members of the public who came out to speak on this item and for understanding the multifaceted benefits of trees, not just to people, but to the rest of the environment as well, but also to people. And I also want to thank the staff for this very necessary foundational work. As John, you pointed out that this was a first step among many. And so I very much appreciate us being able to have this discussion. Councilmember Cohen, I ask similar questions of developers, and I've actually developed a reputation over the years for asking when they show their drawings, and they're usually palm trees outside because it's easier to see the building, for asking, are you really going to plant palm trees? I don't want to plant palm trees. Please plant something that is native and drought tolerant and provides more shade and more benefits. And so people will often come in now and say, don't pay attention to the palm trees. That's not what we're going to be planting. So I should go forward and ask the additional question of, okay, then what are you going to be planting? I'm going to add that to my list. And it is important to note, you know, for businesses like Google, I think they understand too that the benefit of, it's not just a public service that they're doing when they tear up parking lots and actually put in trees. That's also a benefit for their employees. And there's good research that shows that there is stress reduction in areas where we have urban forests or any kind of greenery, really. So I think it's a great plan, and I'm going to continue to do that and also probe a little bit deeper. I did want to ask, the $20 million a year is a very daunting number, and I'm mindful that not everyone can afford to maintain their street trees. And I think I can't remember the number, it was something like $900 every 5 years, I think is what it came out to be. But given that I think we stopped maintaining the street trees and made it the property owner's responsibility because of severe budget issues, we all know that $20 million a year is not something that we just have under the couch cushions. When you come back to us, will you have, or is part of the work plan giving us incremental steps? 250 trees is a super incremental step, very small micro step. And I know Russell agrees with me on that, but something where, what would it cost to, if I'm looking at the maintenance funding needs slide, we've got the street trees and the parks trees. The parks trees budget, 30,000 trees, that's $685,000. If we did the next incremental step of the trees that are not, I think you said 233,000 of the 270,000 are on, that we currently have private property owners maintaining. So that next incremental step would be about 40,000 or 37,000 street trees in the public domain so what amount would that be? Would it be another, close to the 700K of the parks trees? Just knowing the numbers are similar in the numbers of trees?
It's going to be very similar. Yes, it's going to be a little bit lower. When it comes to our street trees, of those 37,000, some of those are within those special districts, so they already receive a little higher level of funding. So it won't necessarily be exactly when you talk about 30,000 in parks and 30,000 or 37,000 as street trees. Yeah. It's not the same, but it's going to be comparable ratio-wise, et cetera. Yes, it will likely be about half of that, maybe 400,000 to $500,000 for just City of San Jose maintained that are outside of those special districts.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask the park trees. So I had a capital project on the perimeter of the Rose Garden, and we put in extra money. That's not, and we're using District 6 parks, regular parks dollars to maintain those trees. We had to replace all the perimeter trees at the Rose Garden. Is that included in these numbers, or is there a separate tree fund that is being talked about the emergency maintenance or the emergency removal of trees for parks? But I think my point is, I think we're spending more. It's just kind of buried in the budget in a different way. And I know I saw Avi put on his camera, so maybe Avi wants to address that.
Go ahead, Avi.
Thank you, Councilmember Davis, Chair Davis, for your question. Avi Otam, Deputy Director of Parks and Parks, Recreation, and Neighborhood Services. So you're right. Within our department's capital budget, we do have a line item for tree services citywide, which has been funded to the amount of $150,000, which if we kind of follow the math is about $5 per tree based on the estimate of the number of trees in our parks. So that's our proactive budget. But you also hit the nail on the head that the reality is our needs are greater. So when emergencies arise, we're confronted with a choice. Do we address the emergency and pull the budget from something else, or do we leave it? And of course, as stewards and providers of safe spaces, we address the emergency at hand. So our estimate just for this last year was we actually spent in reality closer to $400,000, but that meant taking about $250,000 in budget from other efforts in the park system.
Right, understood. So I just want to be clear, we're doing a little bit more than what we're saying. I'm not saying that, when we have a limited budget, we have to make those hard choices. So I'm not saying that's necessarily the ideal choice. It's just that we are actually spending more than what we are saying here on this maintenance funding needs, just practically speaking. So I just want to be super clear about that. I would like some incremental steps, something that is a little bit more manageable than, you know, $6.5 million a year, to give us little bites that we can pull if we have a little bit of a projected surplus in upcoming years. Hopefully that happens, but I think that would be really helpful to me, because $20 million and even $6.5 million is not, those numbers are so big. I mean, I know they're not big relative to our budget, but they're so big relative to all of our priorities for public safety and all the other things that we have on our plate, that it would be great to have some kind of work plan where we're stepping or incremental steps where we're stepping up the budget in a manageable way, and gives us something that we can actually point to and say, hey, now we're doing all the parks trees. It takes this amount of money additional a year, but we're also, I'm guessing, our city attorney's office could say, but we're also decreasing our risk because we have some safety issues. And we've dealt with that in my district over the 5 years I've been in office multiple times. And we also had, thankfully, a tree that came down and hurt no one. But we've also had trees that came down and hurt people. So there's a risk issue and a risk mitigation issue as well that I think bears some discussion, because it's moving a budget item from one to another. And this is a much more proactive way to spend that money, and I would prefer to do it that way. So that's it for my comments. I see no other hands, so let's take a vote. Yasmin? Are you the one doing the vote? The roll call? Or Gina?
Yeah, sorry, Yasmin's having trouble with the mic.
Got it.
Foley,
aye.
Morales,
Yes.
Esparza,
Yes.
Cohen,
Aye.
Davis.
Yes. Thank you. We'll go on to open forum. First speaker is Tessa Woodmansee.
Okay. Okay, good. Well, the one thing I was thinking, hello, yes, okay, good, is that along with what Councilmember Davis is trying to work in terms of permeability of our streets, I think that's a really great idea, and we need to do that. And then we need to be working on traffic calming of our streets. And in combination with that, as well as our tree planting, like we're talking about today, and our climate crisis, and the need for trees, that we need to put medians in streets like Stockton Avenue, even though I just discovered today where a lot of the speeding is happening. Actually, we have a company that actually makes speeding cars that works on Stockton Avenue. So I'm going to deal with that with code enforcement, that we need to speak to that company about they're creating a lot of the speeding that's going on, because they create speeding cars. But in regard, that's where like these cars that run like at 100 miles an hour, because they're like testing it after they get into this company's, souping up their engines or whatever. But the issue of Stockton Avenue is that it's too wide of a street regardless. There's a lot of people who go fast. And so we really need to be traffic calming our streets as in terms of reducing the speed and reducing accidents. And then we need to put tree line medians in the middle to reduce the openness of our streets. And I think that needs to happen in so many places that we're having problems in San Jose. So that's something to think about, is creating more medians to create more spaces for trees, besides just the parking strip. And then also, like Deb Davis was saying, to create these permeable outcuts, onto the street. So any way that we can make our streets smaller, so it encourages slowing our traffic, and then more trees.
Thank you. Next speaker is Alex.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Alex Lansberg. I'm the Research and Advocacy Director for the San Francisco Electrical Construction Industry. I'm calling in because I saw on your agenda earlier today you were discussing the labor transparency, environmental and accountability policies for the long duration storage project of your CCA. The reason I'm calling in is actually we've been involved, myself, a variety of IBW locals from around the Bay Area and Northern California, as well as a whole slew of environmental and environmental justice organizations around Northern California, have been involved in really trying to get the Joint Powers Authority, the California Community Power and Joint Powers Authority, to adopt a group of permanent policies, not just for the long duration storage project. I think based on what we're advocating for is really modeled on what we see in the LDS. That's really a precursor of where we're going, but we are looking to see some greater transparency and accountability efforts through a community advisory committee, through that's made up of regional actors, some making sure that unbundled renewable energy credits that really that are problematic, I think, in the view of a lot of our environmental allies, and much more permanent workforce policies for projects where procurement is happening. I realize that I've only had 2 minutes to jump on this and advise you of this information, but I think it's really important for you all to keep an eye on this and really encourage your CCA to take as strong a position in support of strong transparency, environmental accountability, and labor.
Thank you, Alex. Next up is Blair.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for an interesting meeting today. I hope I can talk to people in the future about, how I feel earthquake preparedness planning is an important concept, and what exactly, how do we talk about this issue more openly if needed? To speak to the many parking items that are part of many council committee agendas this fall, thank you in the efforts we are trying to consider how to return to the ways to think of our collective green sustainable future in a life without fossil fuels or single occupancy vehicles. The theme among parking related subjects also tries to address, the theme also tries to address the future of parking policies and practices in San Jose. Safe, responsible, accountable, and sustainable open public policies and practices simply can offer more help, love, and care for the future of surveillance, technology, and data collection, including ALPR use, that simply should be more openly considered in these parking policy discussions. Don't forget that ALPR data collection used to be held for over a year. Good democratic practices based on openness, good civil rights ideas, good civil protections, and ideas of peace, not war or harm, have developed friendlier, more efficient practices where ALPR data now only needs to be kept for 6 months or even 3 months. Thank you for once again bringing parking issues to council committee agendas as part of a process that can simply bring more important care, heart, and understanding to new AI and overall policy questions this fall. I've been trying to better address these issues with Councilperson Jones and Rules of Open Government for the past few months now, as I'm feeling and hoping San Jose City government staff is working on ways that ask and connects ideas of what can be our more heartfelt, better reasoned democratic practices of ourselves this fall. Thanks for the meeting.
Thank you. Next is Roland.
Thank you. So I'd like to make a couple of clarifying comments on things I touched on earlier. So first of all, I'm a strong supporter of the large canopy trees because that's what makes it possible for somebody like me to live in a house without air conditioning, even though I live very close to Morgan Hill. Moving on to palm trees, I'm concerned about some of the comments that were made about palm trees. First of all, palm trees do not need watering because their roots go straight down to the water table. And second, they do not damage any adjacent infrastructure because they do not have any large roots. Their root system is essentially, it's fiber, it's very small strings of a root system. Now, moving on to water, I watered the Forest City oak trees between Castle Road and Snell on Curie Drive for 3 years. It took me every Saturday morning during the summer months. It was backbreaking, and I can give you amounts of water that it took. Each tree, once a week, needed 10 gallons of water. The way I got it done, I had the 20-gallon bucket, and I had lined up, there were 60 trees, I had lined up 6 neighbors. I was hitting each one of these neighbors for 100 gallons of water every week. You do the math, that's how much it cost them. And they were okay with it. Now, with regards to using hydro to actually store energy, Lake Anderson right now is being completely reconstructed. It's not being repaired. This is a good time to put some hydro in there. But for the system to work, you need some kind of reservoir downstream so that when you got surplus energy being generated by the grid during the day, you can pump that water that's been acclimated downstream and pump it back overnight into Lake Anderson, and that's how the system works. Thank you.
Thank you. Caller 5140.
Yeah, I'd like to express myself about the color-coded language of people. I don't color-code people like, well, the city council members do. So if you're going to start dropping the white word, why don't you say what white people really are? We are European Americans, okay? We're Europeans. So when you start saying brown and black, I don't even know what that is. I know it is African American, Hispanic, or this new thing, Latinx. So I'm going to give you guys a teachable moment right now. Instead of using the word white, think before you speak and use a more educated term, which would be European. Just like I told you before, it's rude, it's racist, and the way it's said, I mean, if we're going to get into like microaggressions, it's the tone that people use about white. Now, I'm technically not. I look it, okay, but I'm not. More of a Latino myself. Maybe a Latin European would be more. You know, if you're going to talk about Italians, you could say Latin Europeans. But, you know, it's a bunch of racists down there. You people, and the people who call in, oh my God. I mean, what if I was to say brown and, you know, give some good tone to it? What do you think would happen? What do you think? I would like anybody at the city council to do a rebuttal on this call, but you won't. You sit back smirking, cackling, probably like Pamela or Cam, whatever her stupid name is, Harris, the vice president you guys love down there. Yeah, I want a rebuttal on this from somebody, even a caller. How about someone call in and try to give me a teachable moment.
All right, thanks, Michael. So now we're adjourned from Transportation Environment Committee.